Hello, everybody! If it's Wednesday, it's Warhammer, and that must mean it's time for another episode of Warhammer Weekly. Joining me, as always, is my co-hostess with the mostest. It's Tyler. What's up, buddy? How you doing?
Not your one and only co-host? I
keep you on your toes.
Okay, thank you. Good to be here. Got our best friend Matt. That's a callback to something before the show.
Also joining us, his first time on the show, Matthew Swinney. Matthew, sir, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show. Good to have you, buddy.
Thanks, I appreciate being here. I consider it an honor to be invited by you two esteemed gentlemen.
Matthew found out how we do it around here, Vince. Reaching out to him 48 hours before the show, and he's like,
"Standard.
First off, is this unusual? I'm like, you don't know how we do it around here, do you?"
It varies. Yeah. Like sometimes we'll have people booked 3 weeks, a month in advance. Sometimes it'll be like a day or two in advance. Life is very busy and tumultuous, but we're happy to have you. To be clear, I want to set the stage here for Matthew. Matthew is what I call the round 5 assassin. He's the destroyer of dreams, the killer of 5-0 runs, okay? He is the person who swoops in when you thought you were on a hot streak, and he shuts that right down. Just shuts it down. And he's going to do it with, like, probably 2016 Stormcast, basically, is what's going to happen. He's going to show up and crush all of your dreams with an army list you don't know, like, don't know how it wins. And he's going to play a super tight, friendly game and leave you in ruins, and all of your hopes are evaporated. This is something Matt has done to me multiple times. I met him in round 5 at NashCon a couple of times. Go ahead.
I was actually thinking about it, and I think I am 4-0 versus the Warhammer Weekly.
Oh.
I've never beat you. I know that's for sure.
Well, Tyler, I felt really bad about Tyler because he was my final match for the first season of NashCon. Yeah, and we threw down. Yep. I think that's the first time we met, right?
Was, man. Yeah, and I was the running flaw. I was too conservative in our game. I paid the piper for it. Anyway, that was
no, it's fine. Round 5 at Adepticon. I'm wandering by the top tables. Martin Orlando, our good buddy, friend of the show, good painter elf man. He's on a hot streak. He's 4-0. He's excited. It's the first time he's lined up for a potential 5-0, right? And I walk by him at the table. He's been talking to me. He's so thrilled. He's like so jazzed because this is his hottest run ever with his Lumineth, right? And I roll up to the table at him, and I see Matthew across the table, and I clapped Martin on the shoulder, and I was like, well, sorry about your loss. Like, this is 3 seconds into the game. They were deploying, and I was like, this is over. You're going to lose. And I was like, I'm not trying to get in your head. I'm just telling you this is what's going to happen. And sure enough, there was one winner of that game and one loser, and Martin wasn't getting the W. So, anyways.
That was a good game, and his army looked substantially prettier than mine.
So Matthew is an excellent player and one that I'm happy to have on as we talk about our topic tonight, which is how to get good, I guess, but a more practical, actionable guide and like the actual skills you should use if you're interested in improving at Warhammer Age of Sigmar. But first, of course, the news. Tyler, what do we got?
News, rumor engine. So somebody sent a tweet out, I apologize, I can't recall who it was, showing this image next to a little ghoul. Okay. And seemed pretty spot on to me, Vince. Did you see that?
Yeah, there are sort of 3 potential worlds of what this is, okay? In my mind, based on what it is. So option 1 is, yes, it's like some generic dead guy FEC thing. Which is certainly possible. They have like that long hair thing in places and often have bones and skulls and stuff trapped and tied in them. Option 2 is Usharon, or whatever his name is, the old special character named hero. Effectively, he was Strigoi, I believe, which is sort of the predecessor to to what Flesh Eater Quartz represents, the sort of ghoulish side. And then option 3 is like a Beast of Chaos thing, like Shaggoths or stuff like that also have frequently... a lot of Beasts of Chaos have that same shaggy fur and have bones and skulls and bodies tied up in their fur. Could be any of those. And I don't have a vote as to what it is. So...
Right on. Any of those sound fantastic. So let's see. Yeah.
I was just going to say, Matt, if you had to pick one of those 3, Matthew, which one are you picking? Which one do you want to see most with out of those 3 options? Generic Flesh Eater Quartz guy, special character Flesh Eater Quartz guy from the old world, or a new, like, maybe let's call it a Shaggoth model. What's your pick?
I feel like a new FEC. I feel like they haven't gotten some love in a while.
I agree. It's an army that could use some units and could definitely use some love in the meta right now. So, hey, I'll even take an Underworld's Warband at this point. Whatever it is, you never know. It could be good. You could end up with a Grashrak or a Slinks Skitter pack. It can happen. So, all right.
Next up, free Warcry rules download. What's this about?
So, as everybody probably knows, we're getting a new edition of sorts of Warcry, because that's on pre-order this next week or whatever, and it's gonna herald not much of a change to the old edition, honestly. It's pretty much just existing Warcry with a little bit of reaction action sprinkled in, but it's basically the same game. However, it does require an update to all of the cards, all of the army cards, so you can use all your existing forces in Warcry. Traditionally, this comes in a thing called like the Tome of Champions. That sounds right. I don't know. Let's just say I'm correct for now. And that book is not so. But instead of releasing the book, they have put out these PDFs. Which is awesome. So they put out all the rules for all your warbands for free, or at least this point we've gotten Order, Destruction, and Death. So I would assume Chaos is tomorrow. I think that's what's been released. So that's great. And it's, a good update, good rebalance of a lot of the cards that were in there, a lot of the stats. Some of the more pesky things were kind of tamped down, so they fit a little better to the power level of the existing Warcry specific warbands. So good things overall. Like, hey, free rules for your game so you can keep playing Warcry. That's great. I mean, all around. Fantastic.
Matthew, you ever play any Warcry?
I've played a couple games, but I never got super into it. The terrain I feel like is awesome. But I can't really comment at all about the rule set because I've only played like 2 games of it, so
it's a fun game, I will say. And one of the things that I really like in the new edition, this we're not talking about Warcry, but let's give a quick thing here. One of the things I really like in the new edition is they tightened up some of the deployments. So you're not like waiting often until deep into the game to get your 3rd deployment group out. You like have 2 groups coming in and then another one very quickly afterward often. So yeah. So good edition, good update. Basically the same rules, so you don't have to learn a whole new game and throw all your old stuff away, and free rules to support it. That's a win right there in my book. So if you're, I would say if you're interested in Warcry or you've been thinking about it, if you're Warcry curious, this is a good time to hop on Pop. So there you go.
Yes. Thanks, Coach. Yeah, let's see. It looks like that image I mentioned on Twitter, just for reference, was shared by Warhammer Rob, not the Honest Wargamer Rob, the other Rob. So thank you, Coach. And then last item here, Golden Demon tickets sold out.
Oh my goodness. So Golden Demon tickets. So let's, I just want to dive in on this for a moment. I was thinking about going. Wasn't sure I wanted to go, but I was like, I'll buy a ticket and then I'll see what I feel like, and I'll buy because you could cancel up to a certain date. And I was like, if I don't buy my plane ticket by then, I'll just cancel it and let it back out into the world. Somebody will get it. So I logged in 6 minutes after the time when I knew they were going on sale, because I was like in a work meeting and didn't have time that went long. Couldn't just like turn and go buy Golden Demon tickets. And sold out. They sold out in a minute. And then they brought up a new set of tickets, a new tranche that was just for Golden Demon, not for the weekend event, basically. Those sold out in like a minute and a half. In the time where I looked at it and texted somebody that, hey, there's Golden Demon specific tickets. I know you missed out. You can go get those. And then I went to click buy, and it was like, bloop, no longer available. And I was like, oh. They're going to release a second tranche of tickets, apparently, on the 8th. So September 8th at, I guess it's 2 p.m. Eastern local time, so 7 o'clock British time. So wherever you live in the world, figure from those two numbers. I don't know how many tickets it will be. Clearly, they reserved some to try to spread it out, but yeah, that's they have a hard cap on how many people they can invite. So it makes for an interesting year. We'll see who amongst the artists who you know I wanted to go got tickets and who didn't. Time will tell. So at any rate, it was just fascinating that they sold out like a lot of people who want to go to Golden Demon in the UK after being gone for 3 years, right? Most UK artists couldn't come over to the US, obviously. So okay. The man among all, are the free download Warcry rules also included in the compendium as a one-stop shop for all current new rules, or is that something else? In the Hardiger, you get like the core rules, everything you need to play the game in that box. In the free download is everything you need to use all the other warbands. Like if you have your regular Chaos armies, Order armies, and so on. There you go. So there you go. That explains that. I don't know about that, Coach. That's probably a bit strong, but I appreciate the sentiment. All right. Now, is that our news? I think that's it. Quiet news week, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Cool beans. All right. Let's keep going. So, pick of the week. Matthew, what would you like to share with everybody and boost the signal on?
So I had two choices. I know you like that when people pick multiple things.
Love it.
Loves it.
So first off, I was just going to say AoS Coach, which apparently is in the chat, so that's pretty cool. But I like his combo of kind of like, he has like brief videos where he like lasers in on a specific topic, and then he has other ones where he takes like a really deep dive, 2+ hour chat with somebody that's had some success with a particular army, and he kind of deep dives. So I like that. Helps me keep a little bit up to date with the meta to the extent that I can. And then another was Season of War, which I like. Specifically, I like the format that they do for the battle reports, especially like the top-down view where they kind of speed it up and then they just kind of give you the highlights. You know, I love watching battle reports, but you know, it's kind of time prohibitive when you have these ones where they're just literally just videotaping the whole thing. It's like, I don't really have time for that. I need it condensed. You know, ideally, I'd like it even more condensed. You know, give me all of the highlights as quickly as possible. But I'm not sure if I'm dating myself here at all. But back in the day, before you know GW blew up the world, I used to watch Once Bitten, I think.
Oh, sure.
Once Bitten.
Yeah.
And,
OB360. Chad was a hero.
Yeah, like I loved his battle reports. You know, he'd take a few pictures and kind of give you the high level, you know, bits and pieces, and you know the tactics and all that stuff. But it was, you know, pretty brief, and so you could kind of digest it really quickly. So I like that stuff. But definitely would like to see some more people trying to do it that sort of style, I guess.
100%, man. Yeah, it's hard to make time for 2.5 hour battle reports.
It's tough. It's tough. I mean,
unless
like, I love
you're
the
painting
detail.
and whatever, but yeah.
I think that, you know, often the good middle ground for me is rerolling ones. Like I don't usually miss a rerolling ones, and it's as simple as they cut out the movement phase and often a lot of like the piling in or stuff like that, right? Like they cut out the fiddly bits, which is what takes a long time. Like if you get rid of all movement from a game of AoS, it's shocking how much faster it gets. Right? So there you go. Okay. Tyler, you got shout outs galore.
So Vince, I figured out how to take this to a new level. See what you do is you link to a Google Doc wherein you have 20 different picks of the week. Technically, it's only one because it's just one link. So expect more of that in your future. I think that's a good solution. Get good at AoS resources. So we'll have that link. I've been trying to compile as many things as I could find around the community over the years. Send them to us. Yeah, check it out if you don't see anything in there. I'll go and mention this now. So the goal here is to put together some kind of future content, right? That would actually be a checklist or a series of checklists on this topic. I mean, at minimum, it'll be a Google document that will have contributions from a number of folks from the community. We've got a lot of ideas that have been sent in. So yeah, check that out. And then I wanted to give a shout out to Mrigank in particular. He's been on the show. He had an awesome checklist as part of those ideas that got submitted. Thank you to Carl Stokes too as well. Carl, I need to get yours into a Google Doc. Finally, Weak and Decadent, they are a new battle report channel. They had Skaven versus Lumineth. My good friend Derick Center. Do you know Derick, Vince? Have you ever met him?
I don't. I might have met him. I apologize. Hello, Derick. If you've met me and I don't remember your name, I apologize. I'm bad with names. If I saw his face, I'd know.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, Derick's, amazing guy. Really interesting Lumineth list running the twins against New Skaven. So yeah, it's a new channel. Give them subscribe, check them out. Like that.
Nice, awesome. I have two special picks of the week this week. So mine are a little unorthodox and different, but they are very special. So the first one is a link to Adepticon put up a special merch offering. If you've ever been to Adepticon, then you're probably familiar with what's colloquially called Fort Wapple, which is the painting area with paints and lights and water and everything you need to just sit down, rock up, and have fun painting your miniatures, whether you're finishing up painting for a tournament or rushing for one of the painting competitions, or you just want to chill out for a little while. You get this nice, beautiful, cozy space where you can go and paint. James Wapple is the godfather of that. He and his wife, Kathy. Kathy recently got a very unfortunate medical diagnosis. And she's, she's fighting it with aplomb and with a brave face because she's an awesome human being and an awesome individual. But of course, this is the United States, so medical costs bring a huge burden to one. And especially when they're two, independently employed authors, artists, basically. And so Gen Con, the guys at Gen Con put together a special piece of merch, a shirt that you can buy that has a commemoration of Fort Wapple on it, and all the proceeds go to Kathy and James to help with their medical expenses in this time. So check that out. The link is down there. It's super awesome of them to do that. The guys who run Adepticon are amazing people, obviously, and that's just the goodest guy move. They went out and did this, and you get an awesome shirt that commemorates an awesome thing, and you get to help somebody out. On that same tip, Harder and Steinbeck, who make awesome airbrushes. You may have heard there's this war going on over in the Ukraine. You may have heard about it. It's been a thing for the past dragging now into its 6th month. Harder and Steinbeck had resources in the Ukraine, most of which they managed to relocate over to other countries. They funded those people getting out of Ukraine and resettling somewhere else. But there are artists who use Harder and Steinbeck airbrushes in Ukraine. One of them in particular is an amazing artist who couldn't leave the country because she has ties to a family that basically can't be relocated. She is an incredible, incredible artist. And so Harder and Steinbeck reached out to her and to myself and some other folks in the community. They made a special airbrush, which will be launching this Friday. If you've been looking to upgrade your airbrush, it's basically an infinity airbrush. It is beautiful. I don't know if I'm allowed to show it, but it's right here. So there you go. You get a little tiny sneak preview. It's an absolutely gorgeous airbrush. It has 2 different cases. It's made with all the same high quality parts as the normal Infinity. And there's a link down in the description to the temporary site right now. If you're watching this before Friday, you can't go and purchase it right now. But if you purchase it once it becomes available on Friday, the profit from that airbrush goes to support a local charity there amongst Harder and Steinbeck. But when I say local, I mean this is literally a group of 3 individuals, a family that the president of Harder and Steinbeck knows, that load up their truck. They have a big truck. They load that truck up with food and supplies and clothes and things that people will need, and they drive down directly to the border and meet refugees coming across and help to find people homes and shelter and food and get them resettled. It is direct charity in the truest sense of the word. There's no middleman. There's no big organization where a bunch of money is going somewhere. It's that money is going from Harder and Steinbeck directly to the people who can use it and put it in play. And the whole thing is a dedication to this artist who lives in the Ukraine. So you get a beautiful, high quality, truly incredible airbrush, and a lot of people who are going through one of the worst things you can possibly imagine get supplies and things they need. So at any rate, that link is also down in the description. It's the one that says Harder and Steinbeck down there. But like I said, the link to purchase it won't be active till Friday. Tune in Saturday. I have a whole video on leveling up skill with your airbrush featuring that airbrush, and that'll also have the link in it and stuff like that. So there you go. Those are my two links. A little more serious than what we normally do on this show, but both things that I think are important. Okay.
Absolutely.
So with that, let's turn to a bit of a lighter topic. Now that we've brought everybody down with wars and medical burdens, let's instead talk about some hobby time. The thing we use to escape from the burdens of our life. Oh, that's a fair point. Chris Black said just Ukraine. I kept saying the Ukraine. Yes, it's totally fair. You're right, Chris. At any rate, Matthew, what's on your table, man? What have you been painting? What have you been working on? You have a beautiful, clean hobby space behind you, by the way.
It varies. I'm transitioning, so right now it's a little bit cleaner than it normally is. But so I remember one of the Warhammer weeklies where you guys were going through all the factions and pointing out which units were going to be good, which one's going to be bad in the new paradigm.
Sure.
And I remember the Stormcast list. You said the worst Galatian veteran unit is the Vanquisher.
Yep.
And I'm like,
which I stand behind.
That sounds like a challenge that I have to accept. So I'm doing my customary Bretonnian conversion on 20 Vanquishers.
Amazing.
Hopefully I can use them effectively.
I can't wait to lose to them. Okay? At the peak of Slanesh's power, this man crushed me with Liberators and a Star Drake. I just want to point this out. I had 4 games where I had more or less had a pretty good run through my opponents. And then, nope, couldn't. That Star Drake. That was the good old days, too, because that was the days of, what was it? The scales with the 4-up Mortal War.
Ignox.
Ignox scales, there we go.
Yep.
Yeah. The good old days. I can't wait to see you just absolutely crush whatever I put on the table with Vanquishers. And I'm forced to literally eat my words.
I actually screenshot that and circled it and sent it to Tyler just because I thought it was hilarious because I'm sitting here, I'm painting them as I'm watching the show. Oh. And I'm just but
amazing.
Yeah, so I'm frantically trying to get those 20 Vanquishers painted in time for NashCon. So that's what I'm up to.
Very nice.
I haven't seen a list with 20. I've seen a lot of lists with 10, so I'm excited.
Well, yeah, two squads of 10. We'll see. I think they can do some work.
You and your original tenors. I remember back in the day with your here's my 10 Retributors and 10 Protectors or whatever the hell you were running. That you would never see. Yeah.
Very nice. Yes, Mike, that was NashCon 2019. Tyler, you paint anything this week? You did, didn't
actually, you? I did. I mean, quote unquote, painted. I got stage 1 of the Slappity Chop going. We got some black primer with an airbrush. Talking about airbrushes, that airflow control, man, that's tricky business.
It is. Please tell me you weren't using your thumb. The position you just made told me you were using your thumb.
I was doing the pen like a pencil. Yeah.
Okay.
Thumb was the guide, not the.
Correct. Yes. That will also be discussed in this week's video on Saturday, so check it out. But yes, this is the correct position. Middle finger under, thumb pressed against the trigger here, finger on top, like this.
More or less.
Yeah, sure.
More or less had that. Yeah. So yeah, I am painting a Lord of Afflictions. a 10 plague bearers, 3 plague drones, 3 blight lords, 2 and a single, and a mind stealer kitty to get ready for NashCon.
Nice.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm just gonna have to get it done.
It's look, you're gonna love how easy slap chopping is. Okay, once you just get that big fat makeup dry brush out, start going to work, and then get out them contrast paints and have a good time and just play with it. Just get a big fat brush. Don't do it with a small brush. I want you to get a big like size 8 brush,
okay.
size 4, size 6, size 8, something like that, and you go ham. Start mixing in yellows and reds and greens. Just have a good time. It's Nurgle. That's the whole point. Just start slapping some color in there. You know,
Nurgle is a good choice, I feel like.
Exactly. You can't go wrong. What color isn't Nurgle skin is the only question. Is it brown, red, purple, green, yellow? Yes.
Yeah.
It's all of those. It's great.
My friend Lucius, he put together just I thought it was an amazing looking Nurgle army in like 2 weeks before Vault Wars. So that sold me. Thank you to Lucius and Bryce in particular, who was loading me all his goodies, airbrush and everything, while I, future down payment on some baby segment I'm going to do for he and his wife. So
there you go.
Appreciate friends.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him. All right. So I don't have a balloon drop scheduled. If I could have, I would have. Let me say that. Secondly,
well, let's wait till I get to at least some contrast. I mean, I don't.
Yeah, sure.
We gotta get. I know people don't consider that painting, but I'm in the process.
Priming is painting. You're getting somewhere. Okay. There's been times where sometimes all you gotta do is you have the assembly phase, then you have the priming phase. It's all good. Now here's the important part. There's like more than 200 people watching this show right now, and I'm not seeing enough hits of the like button for Tyler, who has never painted a model in his life, painting. Let's see some like button here. Let's celebrate this, folks. Smash that button. Okay. For myself, I am working on a thing. I'm very excited about the thing. I can't show you the thing. That's it. But I did get to painting this week. Most of what I've been doing has been honestly just recording videos because as I mentioned to you two gentlemen beforehand, my month of August is a whole entire nightmare. And so I've like done nothing but recording videos to try to get ahead of the curve, so I'm not missing a week or anything. So basically I've just been spending hours and hours shooting and editing. But I am painting a thing that I'm pretty stoked about. You'll see it eventually. All right. With that, gentlemen, shall we turn to the main topic of the night? Get good. Let's talk about getting good, shall we? Okay. Boom. Getting good. Leveling up in Age of Sigmar. All right. Let's talk about what this isn't before I get into any of my slides. This is not us being a jerk and saying this is the way you should play or have to play. This is not saying you're a bad person if you don't take these tips or do these things. This is not saying there's anything more right about playing in this way than any other way you're comfortable with, nor that there is any innate quality of goodness to being better at one particular game of tiny plastic people. Okay? There's no moral imperative here. I just want to super hard draw a line under that. All right? But if you are someone who is inclined to want to, improve your skills, if you've been playing, you'd be like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, or you're looking for sort of those basics, or you're new to the game and you want to know how you could up your skills, that's what this is for. Oh my goodness, excuse me, I'm so sorry.
Sure. So,
that's what we're going to be focusing on. And that's why we brought in the big guns. We brought in Matthew because he is a great player. Like, all joking of aside, Matt, I've had the occasion to watch you play, several times now, and you are truly, I think, in my mind, and I've said this when you're not on the show, you're an amazing player because you're also, no part of you playing as you're kicking people's teeth in are you ever mean or rude or to make people feel bad, or you play fuzzy in any way. You play a tight game, you play a friendly game, and you're so clear and everything, like, here's what I'm doing, this is cool, blah blah blah. Going right back to our playing by intention, You've always communicated in all the games that I've seen you play. And so all of that stuff still stands. And I think Matt's a paragon in all those ways, in addition to being an incredible tactician. So I'm not trying to blow smoke up your butt too much, but I think you are a great guest for this show.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I'm quite up to par for all of those, but I appreciate it, Vince. Thank you. I do like the I think playing by intention is a great motto. I think it makes for better games, friendlier games, and I think it makes you a cleaner player anyway. So
100%.
I'll definitely big thumbs up to that.
Yep. So if you didn't watch our Playing by Intention show 2 weeks ago, watch that as well, because that's very much a companion piece to this show, right? That was the how to sort of execute and, establish clarity. This is the what to do and what to do to get better and to build your skill. And I've divided this into some sections because, of course, we have. So let's start with the foundational stuff. Let's start at the beginning. Let's just lay this down. I want to meet this challenge head on. Skill matters in Age of Sigmar. Okay. Like we had JP on a previous episode where he did a bunch of statistical regression to show how much skill mattered, especially at the top and bottom of the skill curve. There's a reason why the same players frequently end up in the top 10 tournament after tournament, different rule set or different rule set, different army in their hands. Okay. And knowledge matters a lot in this, right? So like skill can sometimes be just being forearmed with knowledge about how your army plays, the nuances of it, how your enemy's army plays, how the scenarios play, so on and so forth. There's just a lot of things to know and remember. And skill comes in both understanding your opponent, what you're going to do to win, what they're going to do to win, and being able to act accordingly. And so the question becomes, what are the practical, actionable steps you can take to build skill? And let me say this, research and resources. I'm glad you're all watching this show. Thank you. I'm so happy you're all here. But don't forget, you actually have to play the game too. You can't learn everything from YouTube. I wish you could. Battle reports can help. Shows like ours can help. But in the end, you do have to put some models on the table and drop some dice, because nothing will teach you like the real thing. All right. Anything foundational I missed there? Tyler, anything before we get into the actual tips and tricks?
Oh, no, it's a pretty good start. Yeah. Well, while I'm thinking about it, we were talking about the playing by intent. I was excited to see a tweet from the Team America AoS account. I think it was this morning that they sent out, and it was a reply to a thread that I had started a few days ago. Just happened to coincide with this show. I don't know. It happens every once in a while.
Weird.
That's weird. So they mentioned explicitly, one of their line items was playing by intent is more or less part of their core operating code, or at least that's what they said they want to live up to and how they want to operate, and avoid gotcha hammer. As we talked about, there's some grayness to what is not gotcha hammer, but I feel like most of the times we know what it is, particularly when it happens to us and we're sitting in it. So Anyway, I just really liked seeing that from them in particular.
Agreed. Matthew, anything from you foundation-wise that I should lay down here?
Well, there is one relatively big topic that I wanted to go through, and I'm not sure if this is the best spot for it or if I should wait, but
okay.
It has to do with kind of how I start most of my games, and it kind of has to do with the tricks and that kind of stuff. But I don't know should I just go for it here, or
let's save it for deployment, because I think it'd be a good conversation to slide into that area.
Okay.
Awesome.
Good.
Hey, one other thing that comes to mind, Vince, this has been on my mind of late.
Yep.
I'm not sure okay, so it's generally, I was talking with Tracy about this.
Okay.
Tracy Ptacek, we were just talking before the show about Partners in War. Tracy and Steve, awesome, played Steve recently. They've been going to a lot of tournaments, love those two, they get their sons involved, they go to tournaments all together as a family. Tracy, they're both, they're now relatively experienced players, have been playing for a while, but not too long ago, they were very new players. And so Tracy and we've had some conversations over the months about her experience of going through the stages of becoming a wargamer. what that's been like and how hard that can be, particularly when it comes to the basic notion that we have in our heads about assessing how well we're doing at this thing, which is, are we winning or losing? And how much of an issue that can be, particularly when you're playing a lot of good players, right? When I started out, I did a lot of losing, and so I feel like we don't talk about that enough, and the challenges of getting people through that stage, or kind of learning how to be comfortable and losing games and kind of reframing it, thinking about it differently, right? All of that. It's a huge topic in itself, I feel like. But I mean, we've lost players locally, one recently, because he got, I mean, there's different variables going on, but I think he got tired of losing. And he's a pretty solid player. He's just playing really experienced people.
Sure.
And so anyhow, that's been on my mind as kind of part of this.
Yep. I think that's right. I think you have to develop a taste for losing and playing people better than you is definitely going to be part of this. Yeah, 100%. All right. So we're going to kind of step through this chronologically. All right. It's kind of the way we're going to lay this out. Because I think there is a skill up possibility at every phase of the process. And the first one's in army selection. All right. And what I mean here is understand an army's playstyle and how that meshes with you. And I think this is a sort of understated point. I didn't see it a lot in the responses you talked about, but this is one that I really think is important. You have a certain set of preconceptions and biases as to how you want to play the game. And if you pick an army that plays the opposite of that, okay, you will tend to perform worse. Because in moments of like high stress, when you fall back on heuristics and shortcuts, you will start making erratic decisions that are not in line with the game plan of how that force should be played. You will fall back on the way you want to play it, that's in your head, the way you want to play these games, right? And so this is like the fundamentals of the army as well as its general play style. What I mean by that is like, let's say you're somebody who's rip-roaring and ready to go. You love a good alpha strike. You're like, you want to get in the fights. You want to get to crumpin'. You're a born orc at heart, right? If that's the case, then playing a KG castle mobility army that never goes in and fights, you know, playing some Legion of the First Prince nonsense, it's probably going to be a bad time for you because you won't make the right decisions. Your brain isn't telling you to make the right decisions, right? This is something I think you probably ran up against, Tyler, with your Iron Jaws, because you're exactly the opposite. You're a naturally KG, mobile, dance around, wait for my moment, be super risk averse, careful, reactive player. Whereas Iron Jaws, it's like you can do that a little, right? But it's
I've
more
struggled
like
the most with Iron Jaws of any army that I've ever played in this game.
Yeah, you got to be willing to get in.
Yeah, Iron Jaws, they're kind of the definition of aggressive, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, you got to be willing to go. Like, some part of playing Iron Jaws is knowing your math well enough to understand, like, I will do this X amount of damage to this save, and it's time to risk it for the biscuit. Right? Like, if you play Iron Jaws, you have to be willing, probably fairly early in the game, turn 1 or 2, to push all your chips toward the middle of the table and say all in. Right? You gotta pull an Optimus Prime and say one shall stand, one shall fall. Okay. But this also comes to fundamentals of like the number of figures you want to move, the number of decisions you make on average in the army, the complexity of those choices. You know, I think of something like Sons of Badmon. Say what you will for that army. One of the great things about playing it is, boy, do you not have a lot of decisions to make. You're like, it is a pure fundamentals army, right? Where are you moving? Who are you fighting? That's it. You don't have like, hold on, I'm playing Lumineth. I've got to do this, and my Catlett does this to make these people not sad, and then you have neg 1 bravery, and then I'm going to pass this around and do, right? That's not a jab on Lumineth. I saw in the Lumineth chat somebody was saying that all we ever do is crap on them. You're not wrong.
All we ever do is crap on Daughters of Cain. Get it right, people.
I like Daughters of Cain. At any rate, So here I want to turn this around, Matthew. Why? Like, you played Stormcast a lot. It's more or less your main, and every time I've ever met you, you've played Stormcast. Why? What is it about Stormcast, and how does it mesh well with sort of your take on playing this game?
Well, so that's it's kind of twofold. It's kind of somewhat of a happy coincidence here because the main reason I actually initially made the purchase was actually aesthetics, because for the longest time, I actually kind of hated the way they looked. Like I really hated like the robotic faces and all that. And so, but then I had the idea to do the Bretonnian conversion, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh wait, look at this Dracothian guard. I can do all this. I can get rid of this. I can put on some. So anyway, so I think aesthetics definitely played a big part. I think once I got into it, I really like the fact that I like having a big selection of good utility heroes and tools. And I think for a long time, Stormcast has had that. Like their heroes have always been really good synergy pieces, which I really enjoy. I really like how tanky they can be, and to a somewhat frustrating point at certain points in time for your opponents. If you just really want to make something rock hard, you can do that. They can also, punch. They have some mobility. They have a lot of different tools in the toolbox. So I think it was somewhat of a happy coincidence because I kind of got them for aesthetics reasons to do that, specific conversion that I really wanted to do. And then it ended up kind of working out because I think the play style does sort of suit me pretty well.
Yeah, my experience of you is you're a very considered player. And because the way Stormcast sort of do have different synergies and often have optionality in how you use your pieces, I think that just there's like a natural alignment there, right? It's how am I getting the most out of all these units? You often don't have maybe the same number of options as some other armies, so you got to use your pieces well. Yeah. Okay. The other thing, go ahead, Tyler.
Well, I was going to say, while I think about it, one thing, I remember thinking this playing Matt Yu and playing Sean Clark at both at NashCon and in 2 different years. You guys are both some of the top players around, and gave me the feeling of hope of, it was like pretty clear to identify the gap that I would sometimes feel between what you guys would do and what I would do. It felt like a very surmountable gap, right? Like I've often had this feeling when it comes to the best players. Now I could be telling myself a story. It's like that there's not a gap, right? In terms of, we're not talking about a Michael Jordan versus name your all-star, right? Your average NBA all-star. There's like, I feel like there's a certain ceiling. Now I could just be making this up. I'm sure Bill Souza and others are phenomenal, Ronya with how well she's done, but I've just gotten that impression over the years of playing, at least among the best players that I've played, consistently they're not doing anything that different than what I think of as good fundamental Warhammer, which gave me a lot of hope in playing people like you, for whatever that's worth.
I think that was the weirdest backhanded compliment in history. I think what he said, Matthew, is he thinks you're good, but I mean, like, it's an achievable good.
It's an achievable good.
I guess it's good. I mean, to be completely honest, like even, I guess you were relatively new at that NashCon tournament, but like I thought you knew your rules well. Like I thought your tactics were pretty decent. You made a couple of strategic errors.
Right.
But yeah, no, I mean, I guess I would follow up with saying, like you said, I don't think there's any like Michael Jordans when it comes to this sort of stuff. I think most people can learn the fundamentals. They can learn their rules. They can gain experience, and they can become great players. I don't think there's nothing stopping anybody from becoming.
That's the main. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Exactly.
Becoming better. Yeah.
I've played a lot of good players in 7 years. Like people, playing, but just no one has ever done any. Yeah, like it's not rocket science as this old
sure
thing goes.
You're not getting absolutely taken to the cleaners in such a way where like it would be if you lined up against even current MJ on the half court.
Right.
Yes.
right, exactly. So yeah.
Okay. The other thing I'll say here is, and I think this is important, is once you've made your choice of an army, understand 2 things. And this is, I think, so important. Its power level will change over time. You will not always be in the best position vis-a-vis the meta. That doesn't necessarily mean you can't do well with it, as many people have shown, right? your knowledge of your army and knowing how to actually utilize it to the best of its ability is worth far more to you than the few percentage points of win rate you could get by jumping forces. Now, that's not to say don't. If you play the army and you don't like it, it isn't aligning with your playstyle, you were wrong on point one, like, oh, I thought this would work and it didn't, right? Then, hey, switch, cool, no issues, right? No drama llama. But if it's aligned and you're just not having the sort of luck, understand that, like, maybe you need to improve and work on more. But that proficiency with that individual army is going to go a long way. And then you have to practice and stick with it to improve. Deliberate practice. We'll talk about what that means on coming slides. Okay.
Yeah, I think again, I sort of I kind of lucked out into that to a certain extent because I'm a relatively slow painter, and so to a certain extent, like I have a couple of other armies, but it takes me so long to paint that usually by the time tournament's rolling around, I'm like, okay, well, my Stormcasts are the only thing painted, so that's pretty much what I'm going to roll with. But it does mean that I've gotten a lot of experience playing Stormcast over the years, so that's another kind of funny.
Yeah, it's worked. Of all the armies I practiced against, I will tell you, I did not practice against a Stormdrake and Liberators with my Slaanesh. That wasn't on my radar. So. Next up is list building. And oh boy, is this one an important part of the phase. I think this is something that a lot of people have a conception is pretty important. But I think but why or how is the tougher part of this, right? Like, it's easy to say, hey, list building's important. Cool. Right? Like, now what? What do I do with that? What do you think I've been doing? Not building lists? Like, I'm trying over here, man. Okay? Not just randomly putting models on the table. This isn't 2015 open play or something. So here's the first thing. So I'm gonna rattle off my items here. Let's have some discussion as we're going. We'll do a couple here. Spend time thinking about your list. This is it. That's the step one. It's so simple. But just spend some time thinking about it. Like, don't just roll in and get to the first list. Play around a little. See what your options are. Understand what you could switch. What if I get rid of this, what does that open up for me, right? Don't just settle on the first 2,000 point thing you crank out because it happens to fit. I mean, if you're just having fun, that's fine. But if you're trying, again, as with all these things, if you're trying to improve, do that. And so use that to try different combinations, units, power pairs, combos. Maybe those Vanquishers are the hotness if you get them on the table the right way, right? So that's where I'll start. I'm going to pause there for a moment. Tyler, what do you think about that?
It makes me think about. I was watching a show with Emma Mangles. She had a show with Coach, and she showed the spreadsheet that she had used for developing her Nurgle list that she took to Adepticon. We had that whole thing. She ended up second at Adepticon, and did really well with this unique Rotbringer Coven list. Almost nobody at the time was playing Rotbringer Coven. Anyway, she went through all these different iterations with that list to get to her final point that she took to Adepticon. It was awesome. Like, good detailed notes, going through why she did this, results she got, why she changed this. So yeah, I think keeping track of that in a spreadsheet, just having a way to document that, you can look back on it. And obviously doing that with your games in general. I've started doing that over the last few months. It's been amazing, just having that documentation. I can go back and look, okay, I did this wrong, did this right, etc. over games that you'll never be able to remember without something like that documented.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Matthew, what about yourself?
So yeah, I would say this is one of the steps that I do think I do relatively well, and usually I spend a lot of time kind of thinking about lists, composing lists, mixing and matching. Usually I find that my lists kind of build themselves up to about like 1,400 to 1,600 points.
Sure.
And then it's usually that last few hundred points where I'm like, okay, well, I could take this, I could take this. These are all the options. Which one makes sense? Which one do I like? And then I kind of build a few lists, and then I'll go and I'll play some games with those lists, ideally against different opponents. So you don't kind of get just one experience with it and then kind of sit down and then kind of evaluate it. And hopefully if you have some good friends that you can kind of have a discussion about it and say, okay, well, what what do you think of this list? What do you think of this unit? What do you think of this unit? What if I, and have the conversation right after the match and say, well, I was thinking of swapping this guy out for this, or this unit out for this. What do you think? And then kind of get your opponent's feedback from their perspective, like, okay, well, that would have changed things in this way, and maybe this would have played out differently. And so, list building is definitely something my wife will tell you I spend a little too much time racking my brain on, but it's definitely important.
So the next thing I want to hit these next 3 points in kind of order, and that is understand the role of every unit that goes in your list. Like everything that goes in your list should be intentional in some way, should have a purpose. We've talked a lot about the pet unit. I'm going to leave that to the side for a moment. I tend to believe you can make that work as long as it still has a role. Like you can use your pet unit that isn't as good as long as it still is filling some overall synergistic purpose, some role in the overall list. But what's it there to do? Is this a hammer? Is this an anvil? Is this a deck chair sitter? Is this mobility? Is it utility? Is it chaff? Is it multiple of these roles? Right? Like, what is it there for? Who is it pairing with? Who would it want to be deployed with? Who does it want to stay near during the game? Am I restricting my mobility too much by doing this? This is a thing I think people often miss, like this kind of thing. Not only just what is each unit's role, but also then how it's going to work with its friends. Is it enabling that role or reducing that role? So, for example, I would see this a lot where people would build all these buffs and be like, look at how amazing I can make this one unit. Cool, your entire army has to stay within 8 inches of this linchpin. Right? And all you've done is just make it so your army is so restricted on the board. You put a noose around your own neck. Right? And you made an easy thing for me to target. Sorry, go ahead, Matthew.
Sorry, one thing that I've kind of found, this is a very specific example, but it kind of speaks to that point, is, Gardas. I've played some lists with Gardas, and it seems really strong. I'm just like, oh man, I really want that 5-up ward save on those fulminators. That just sounds so brutal. But, it restricts you so much, right. And it's a 12-inch bubble, so it seems like it's a lot. But, when you actually get down to play, it's like, oh, I want to teleport this guy over here and hit from behind. I want to deep strike these guys over here and do this. And then you're like, oh, wait, literally only one unit is actually benefiting from this thing that I'm building this army for. And I'm just like, you know what? I'll just take the 6-up ward that I get from hammers. Right. And now I have a bunch more flexibility to do everything that I want to do on the board. And I'm not constrained in this little bubble, around this little foot slogging hero.
Yep.
So, yeah.
It's a perfect example of why I don't think you see Gardas as much, because it's banking too much on a tiny bubble on a slow guy. Right. Mm-hmm. And
there's just not much flexibility.
Right. And so I think, you have to think not only what's that role you're filling, but can this unit operate independently? What does it need to reach its efficiency level where it's going to pay its points? Right? What power pair, what hero do I need to escort it, to babysit it, to make it work? You think about here's an example from Skaven. You think about like a Warp Lightning Cannon. I look at a Warp Lightning Cannon list, it says 150 points, that's a lie, right? It's 255. Because to make a Warp Lightning Cannon do anything, you're going to have an engineer babysitting it, sitting there, right? And that thing moves no inches effectively. So you've got 2 units now, a little more than 10% of your army, that's just sitting in the backfield. Now, if you roll the 1 and pop 12 mortal wounds straight into something and just ice it off the table, hey, great, you paid your money back. That's a great day, right? But it's very easy for that not to happen. And so you have to ask yourself, am I willing to dedicate this amount of resources into this thing, right? Mm-hmm. The second thing I'll say on this is know your threats. So you should have at least 3 to 4 threats and know what it takes to use those threats. Know the math of those units. By the way, threats don't necessarily mean they can go kill something, though that's often what it is. Often this manifests as hammers. But it doesn't have to be just that. Tree Revenants in Sylvaneth are a threat. Sure. Because they can sit anywhere, way out of range, and they threaten every objective on the table. And they're Galatian veterans. So somebody makes something a proving ground, they can pop over there and grab it. They don't care.
There's a case to be made that they're the poster unit for this season right now.
Sure.
With the battle tactics that we have, with how these missions are actually played, it's Tree Revenants. Yeah, they just generate you battle tactics left, right.
Yep. I see the word threat as something that generates momentum for your side. Scoring points, removing enemy units, things like that, right? And so this could be a main punch, a counter punch, a mobile threat, mobile objective grabber. All that stuff can be threats. Have 3 to 4 of those. You want a density of that in your list to where somebody can't just pick one off, right? Which leads to the last point I'll make, and then I'm going to throw it back over to you, Matthew, which is know what you can lose. This is a game where things die. Okay? So you got to get into that. You got to accept you're going to lose stuff. That's number one. Like, you will lose models. You will lose things you care about. What can you lose? And if you lose it, what's your plan B, C, D, E, right? What can you afford to lose and have your path to victory still be open?
Arguably know what you're supposed to lose. A lot of the lists are had.
Sure. Yeah. We'll talk about that actually on I think the next slide, or maybe the slide after that. I don't know. 2 slides from now, we'll talk about that. Matthew, what do you think about this? How do you think about list building in these terms? Do you think about like what you can afford to lose? How do you fight if this thing's gone, so on and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have a clear picture of what units are getting work done. And where my liabilities are, I think. So for me, I when I read know what you can lose, I immediately sent know what you can't lose.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
Sometimes, ideally you want to minimize those sorts of units, right? I don't like having crutches basically where it's like this one thing if your opponent takes it out, because that makes you fairly fragile. It was one of the things that I kind of didn't like about my Adepticon list was those damn Raptors. Now, granted, Raptors have ridiculous range, and so it was incredibly painful for the opponent to actually get to them. But in the back of my mind, I always knew, if somebody had something that could reach out and touch those Raptors, that's probably the game.
Because you were Stormkeep, right? With that list, you were not.
Yeah,
Silent?
yeah. I was Stormkeep.
So you didn't have the get out of jail option.
Yeah, I think the meta choice probably is Scions, but I kind of got tired of Scions, so I want to try Stormkeep, and they do some good stuff. But for instance, I played at Adepticon. I played a Deepkin list, and I think the matchup was his. He had a lot of 24-inch, like 14-inch move units that could easily have countered my Raptors, and and he just shuts off shooting in that first round, right? And so from deployment, that matchup, I'm like, wow, this is his game to lose, because he just has my Raptors dead to rights. Like there's no reason why, and I ended up kind of playing some mind games. I have Bastions, so I could do some redeploys, and I ended up shoving the Raptors all the way on the right side of the board to try and kind of force them out of position and all this other stuff. But it was definitely a matchup where I was very aware of the fact that this one unit was very powerful, but somewhat fragile, that I could not afford to lose. And my opponent had a really, really good counter to it. And so it definitely put me on the back foot right from the get-go.
Yep. I like that. And then my next point is understand your wound count, your drops, the sort of key numbers of your army, versus the benchmark, and plan accordingly. So like the benchmark for wounds is probably around 100 wounds right now across all the armies. It's in that range, maybe 90, maybe 110. It's around there. And it's probably 3 to 4 drops. Okay. So like you can look at that and know what your plan is, right? If you're running a thin list, you've got like 80 wounds. Well, then you need to use your pieces very carefully because you don't have extra wounds to bleed, right? If you've got 200 wounds worth of bone splitters on the table, you know that you can play a little messier. You can go for a more board control strat because you might have double the wounds of your opponent, right? So you can afford to throw some bodies in the fire if it means you maintain some kind of board presence or, make them play differently. even if you don't pick up their pieces, if you just put them off their game, off their strat, and then you lose a unit, that's a fair trade for you. You know, you had 20 extra wounds you could just throw in the bin, right? If you are super high drops, great. Know you're higher than average, and in most games you won't have the choice, and plan accordingly. What do you do if given the first turn? What do you do if given not the first turn, right? Like, what is going to be your response? How are you deploying, assuming you have no clue what's going on, right? And in most games, you can probably tell just because you can look at how the opponent's setting up and what they're choosing as to what they're going to do. But at any rate, and we'll talk about that in the deployment section. But, you know, make your plans aware of the generic benchmarks. Like, call it 100 wounds and 4 drops. How are you vis-a-vis that spectrum? And then I have here other notes, casters and nonetheless spells. Okay, I'm going to ask a question. I think we're probably careening into a world where spell doms are at least a thing, right? Like, and magic matters a lot. Do you always put a caster in your list in an age of spell doms? Matthew, what's your take on it? You might have a slightly different take because Stormcast have an ace in the hole for a crappy caster.
Yeah, well, for me, I almost, now granted, it's because Stormcast don't really have a lot of great alternatives, but pretty much I'm finding myself always taking Master of Magic. Sure. So that and that's kind of my low bar. It's like, at the very least, I've got one Dispel that I can reroll on. And, you know, that does improve your odds fairly significantly. And, you know, short of an Incantor just shutting one down, I'm pretty much putting that Master of Magic in every list. Now, again, if you're playing an army that has better choices that compete better for Master of Magic, then maybe that's not, maybe that's a more difficult choice. But for me, that's kind of my low bar for having at least one reasonably good chance at shutting down a spell.
Sure, makes sense. Because oftentimes there will be one spell is the one you need to stop. Right, which is why the Incantor can be a great pick in Stormcast, because at least it gives you one round where you know you've got it turned off.
Yeah, no, I think that's if you're going up against a spell dom, or if you're going up against somebody that just you clearly know they have you outmatched, you have to recognize that and say, okay, you know, which spell can I really not afford to let them get off, and then that's the one you target, and hopefully they don't roll boxcars, or you're not, you know, rolling up against Techless or some other nonsense.
Sounds familiar. I'll tell you, but we'll discuss that here, a game I played this weekend. And then endless spells, like, expect they're going to be out there. Like, they're a thing right now in a big way in the meta. Purple Sun alone is going to occupy a lot of tables, but beyond that, you're going to see plenty of other things. You're going to see, you know, cogs and spell portals, and maybe some gnashing jaws here and there, and maybe some little geminids. Like, these things will be around, so expect them to be there, and know how you're going to answer them.
We could see the Rune Lord showing up in more lists right now. Rune Lord is a little 95-point order hero that can slot into certainly Stormcast list. A lot of order armies can ally in Cities of Sigmar. So yeah, slot in a Rune Lord. It gives you a +2 to unbind, and I believe Dispel as well. I can't recall if it has 2 unbinds. Maybe it's just 1, but
it's just 1, but still.
Yeah, help you get rid. I mean, yeah, you're gonna get hit initially by whatever, but the chance to get rid of it could be really impactful.
+2 is a massive difference to your unbinds or to your dispels. I mean, it's crazy how that mathematically affects your chance to get rid of a spell. Especially in a world where if you don't happen to be fighting a spell dom, like, it's crazy the difference that makes. I want to answer a few questions that came up in the chat. Eric Doty said, what role does a deck chair correspond to? A deck chair sitter. Deck chair sitter is a unit of 5 dweebs who are meant to sit around in the back and be on an objective and then maybe go do something later. They're meant to sort of sit on your home objective and usually hedge out teleports or hedge out ambushes or things like that. They can be used as sort of backline chaff often, or backline board control, or just as your army moves forward, they sort of cover the rear, as it were. They can slot in and be a second level of chaff if you need to protect yourself against like being double turned, so you can have double chaff lines. Deck chair sitters will often step up in that role. So that's where that is. And then what are you guys using for AoS list building? War Scroll Builder all the time, every time it's on. It's the only thing you build with. I don't know why anybody uses the app. It is War Scroll Builder on the Warhammer community site, created and run and updated by our Lord and Savior, Tony P., who is the man, the myth, the legend himself. And it is the only resource you need in list building. It generates beautiful, efficient, easy to read, gorgeous lists, and calculates everything you need in it. It's wonderful. And as Coach points out, and it is a great point, Tyler, because he is a priest and not a wizard, he can take advantage of heroic willpower to get that bonus unbind. So he could do 2 at +2.
Oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah, and priests can help out as well. I played against Fire Slayers, and with Nurgle had no answer to that firewall that you actually cannot pass over. So wasn't thinking about it, giving my opponent first turn, and he just plopped that right in front of my. I'm not playing the fly spam list, the Blight Lord spam list, so had to deal with that most of the game. But yeah, without any way to get rid of it, right? No priest in the army.
Sure.
So yeah, that's a good shout. Just a couple other things that came up. I saw Vince, Sean had mentioned list building with battle tactics in mind is another level. Reminds me, I'm gonna do some shout outs because again, we had a lot of people send in ideas, and I just want to try to give some coverage of some of these things. So we have a list of thank yous in the show notes for everybody. Thank you everybody in the community who contributed to this. Like I said, there'll be more coming in the coming weeks with all of this. But Mason Knox, he had a great point about what he called road mapping, which is part of list building for him. So he generally has a plan that he tries to sort of like an adaptable plan, right? That he comes into every game, mission, and so on with. But he can sort of like, I want to try to do these battle tactics in this order. I want to try to execute these things in terms of how I'm using my pieces, how I'm doing my deployment, blah, blah, blah. To have a roadmap roughly in mind. That can be adapted. Now, obviously, when you get punched in the face, things go wrong, you got to be able to adapt. That's where a lot of players can fall short. So yeah, I like that concept of road mapping within this. I thought it related well to what Sean said.
Yep, absolutely. Eric, examples of deck chair sitters. Sure, I got you covered, buddy. 5 Liberators. It is the most classic example in the world because they can be chaff, they can sit in the back line, they could get thrown around by a translocate later. They're actually tough enough that your opponent has to dedicate some amount of resources to actually lifting them, and because they will count as a lot if in something like Stormkeep or if they're in Expert Conquerors or whatever. So stuff like that. All right. Matthew, I know you're a big fan of the Liberators. Been put them to good use. So
I've won a lot of games off of Liberators. It's funny.
Yeah.
I've won I feel like half my games I've won off of Liberators, just like keeping points or outlasting. I mean, I don't know how many times I've had people think that they're going to pick up a 5-man unit of Liberators that are sitting in cover on an objective with some other battle line unit, and it's like that's not going to happen.
Right. Yep, exactly. All right. Next up, pre-game. So you've got your list, but you're not playing the game yet. This is pre-game. Okay? I think this is a phase a lot of people skip, but this is to me is important. Number 1, checklists and practice. Okay? So like practice means, by the way, that might mean playing. It might just mean actually setting up your army and seeing how it fits and seeing how you can cover the board. Like, you can just set up your army on a board. It's entirely possible. You can do that. Nobody has to be on the other side of the table. So you can just play with different setups and understand what they are, right? And then a checklist. By phase, what are you going to do? Start of the hero phase, I do this and this and this. There's AoS reminders out there that will do it automatically for you. You can easily make your own checklist if you don't want, the only problem I have with AoS reminders is it's quite heavy. There's quite a lot to it. You might just want to make your own checklist. That's fine, whatever. But make a checklist. Just have a piece of paper you can reference to go, I did that, I did that, I did that, I did that, I did that. Cool. Great. Good. I didn't miss anything. Right?
Use it to get off book. It's like I've just been doing this with Nurgle, of course, so I put my Cycle of Corruption and the Summoning. I've got all of this info that I need on 2 pages now.
Sure.
The order of operations, hero phase, etc. Mostly have all that down now after a dozen games. Cycle of Corruption, all of the critical stuff is there on the first page, and never touch the book. War Scroll, I don't list out all the stats on the War Scrolls, only the ones that for some reason my brain can't remember. So like Plague Bearers, I can, those 4s and 3s, 4s to hit, 3s to wound. Is it 4s and 3s? Is it 3s and 4s? That sort of thing. It will go on that page. Yeah, absolutely. Get off book. That's a huge thing.
Yeah. No, I have a similar sort of cheat sheet where I kind of put everything in there, and I put rules that I keep forgetting, like when a new book comes out or something, and for example, like Blaze of Glory for Stormcast was something new that can actually be really strong, but like my first few games I kept forgetting it, and so I put it right at the top of the list so that every time I'm like, oh no, now I remember, and you'll kind of train yourself, and the cheat sheet will kind of adapt, and as you start remembering things, you can take stuff out and put in stuff. For me, one of the biggest things is actually I have a little table where I shorten the descriptions for the battle tactics because I don't know about you, but for me, like I'm glad that they're painstakingly going into all this detail to make these battle tactics very specific. But every one of them is like a paragraph, and it's like no, I just need to know what do I need to pick a unit, kill a unit, what are all the details I need so that because that's something that you're going to do at the top of a round every round, and it's incredibly important that you get that right. But you don't want to waste 10 minutes like going through and reading the whole thing and be like, okay, no, I don't want that one. No, I don't want that one. You want to be able to kind of glance through it, spend 1 or 2 minutes, making sure you're considering all your options, and then make the right choice and move on.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Agreed. It's so funny you mentioned that freaking explosion. I forgot it for the first half of the game. Cause this last weekend, I was just playing I was doing some tournament prep, but I didn't have I haven't made my checklist yet. Cause I'm playing with a couple different lists, right? So I didn't want to make one when I might sub out or swap units or whatever. So I got it for half the game, and I was like, oh crap, I have this blow up thing. And then I remembered it, and then literally he turns around with one of his units, kills one of my heroes who had charged in, and then the hero blew up and killed his unit in return. And I was like, well, there we go. Glad I finally remembered. It's worth it.
I've finally gotten to the point now where I'm actually factoring the blow up into my math in my head, because I'm like, I used the Vanquishers against a practice game. They came in, they killed the unit that I wanted, and then he countercharged them and with a Demon Prince and some other trash. And I'm sitting there doing the math, and I'm just pretty sure I'm going to blow this Demon Prince up with my explosions. And sure enough, he's like, oh yeah, I'm going to take out all these Vanquishers. And I'm like, yeah, I knew you were going to take out the Vanquishers, but now they're going to blow up your Demon Prince along with the primary target that I took out. So it's this 250 point unit, cleaned up 400, 500 points worth of, targets. And, it was, the explosion was pretty nice.
Nice. All right. Know the battle plans, know the scenarios. I cannot impress upon everybody this enough. Read them, play them, understand what the paths to victory are in them, and the nuances of them. Do not make the first time you're encountering a battle plan when you rock up to game 1 of your tournament, right? If your tournament posts the scenarios they're going to be playing, or like NashCon does, where they post 7 and say, hey, we're going to play 5 of these. That's what I've been drilling on. I've been that list of 7 has been my Bible that I use to play every game right now. I'm we're playing one of these 7. We can play whatever you want, but it's one of these 7, right? And that leads to this. So know your opponent's army, even if you just understand the basics. I understand that hey, look, life, it's pretty busy. You got a lot going on, folks. I understand. You got kids, you got partners, you got a job, you got everything else in the world going on. It's how in the heck universe can you memorize what 25 armies do times X number of units? That's unreasonable. I'm not saying that. Tyler and I and Tom know a lot of these things because we have to, because we talk about it every week, but most people don't have the luxury where you're forced to memorize all of this stuff for your show. So, but even if you just understand the basics, how does this army play? What are the threats in the army, right? Like we mentioned Ironjaws. Okay, what do you need to know about Ironjaws? We need to know they move fast, they hit super hard, they can cheat movement and jump across the board, right? And pigs and the mega boss do an outrageous amount of damage, especially if they call the WoW. So your chaff is really important, and your counter punch is really important, right? Even if you just know that, I mean, there's more to know, but even if you just know that, it puts you in a much better place than coming in cold, right? And that's pretty easy. That kind of thing is easy to remember. You can sit up at the table and be like, okay, cool. Big thing on the monster, dudes on pigs. I got to watch out for those. They're super fast and hit hard. Got it.
Right.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, and most everybody's familiar with there's often a set of the same questions that we ask each other at the start of a game. If we're in particular not familiar with, I was having a chat with Matt after he won Adepticon, and you were telling me, Matt, that you weren't that familiar with some of the armies that you played, right? And you actually asked, the email that you sent over to us was the exact question I asked people, just kind of colloquially. What are your tricks?
Yep.
Those, and everybody knows what that means.
This is the best
What
time
are
for you
your
to talk
tricks?
about what you mentioned earlier, Matthew. So take us through that point you had mentioned earlier, because I think this is a good one to talk about this right now.
Yeah. So, and I'll say, this is probably the piece of it that I think a lot of people might be surprised with how little I actually know about a lot of people's armies. The research and all that, like I just don't have the time to know everything about every army,
Right.
and I like you said, I generally try to know kind of big picture, like what they do and how they win. But a lot of times, for instance, like the Fireslayer book had just come out, like right under the wire, right, for NashCon or for Adepticon. And I think the Deepkin actually had gotten a new book, and that counted for 3 of my games. So it's like, how can you prepare for that, right? Unless you're just on top of it right at release, you buy the book and you're sifting through it. But anyway, so the way that I kind of get around that gap to a certain degree is at the beginning of the game, usually even before deployment. When we kind of share lists, I'll ask my opponent, what are your tricks? My tricks, and generally, to kind of keep it friendly and to hopefully, make them more comfortable. I'll be completely 100% transparent and say, these are my tricks. This guy teleports. This guy has some silly thing where if you don't kill him, he heals up all the way. And this guy can do this. These guys are incredibly killy. You don't want to be charged by these guys. Whatever. And then I'll ask them, what are your tricks? What are your gimmicks? What are your shenanigans? And then once they kind of give me that rundown, I'll ask like kind of a slew of kind of a checklist real quick. Do you have any teleports? What are your move ranges? Do you have anything that can run and shoot? What are your shooting ranges? What are your sources of like mortal wounds and rend?
Yep.
Defenses. What's your armor saves? Ward saves, just kind of these basic stats so you can kind of register as they're going through. Okay, ping. Okay, that's his source of mortal wounds. Okay, that's where he's getting his armor cracking. That's his teleport. Et cetera, et cetera. That way you can kind of rack and stack. And I'm kind of already thinking about target priorities. Matchups that I definitely don't want. Like, okay, this into this is really bad for me. This is the matchup I want, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. You mentioned it earlier, but like some part of it is being able to, when they just, even if you don't know it, if you have the general concept and then they explain what their kind of tricks are, if they're talk about their army, that's going to connect the dots for you real fast, right? If you have the foundation, the high level, the big picture, it becomes much easier for you to understand the specifics when they then lay it out for you, right? You roll up against Doc, you remember like, okay, bow snake shoot real far and do mortal wounds, and I can't kill Morathi. I can't get her off the table in one round, right?
Yep.
And then they explain how their army works. You're like, okay, got it. Linchpin is kill those bow snakes if I can and make sure I do 3 wounds to Morathi, right? Because they tell you Morathi can't die. She can take 3 wounds around, but she can't ever heal, blah, 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 right? Cool.
Yeah.
It helps you connect the dots.
Go ahead, Tom.
No, I'm good.
Okay. Yeah, no. For example, for Stormcast, for me, one of the things I'm always looking for is, where's their rend coming from? Because if they've got, if they've only got one unit who can really crack armor, that's something I hone in on real quick, because it's like, okay, well, if I pick that up, then he just can't touch me,
right.
Or if it's mortal wounds or whatever.
Yep, absolutely. And that kind of leads to the next one, which is, know your own path to victory. And this has to do with, again, like you mentioned earlier, Tyler, the roadmap, your general plan, right? What do you have to do in this scenario to win, right? You've got a set of tools, your general plan. Now map it onto this scenario. Okay? And how do you get around that if you can't use your normal tactic, right? Hush up, Caleb. I think you're just fine. I don't think you need any help from me, especially when, you might be rolling into a new book at some point in time soon here. So the, I'll give you an easy example actually from this last weekend's game. So right now I'm playing like a Spell Dom Stormcast army. That's what I'm bringing to NashCon. Okay.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. It's good times.
Oh,
anyways, so that's what I'm doing. And so this last week I tested against my Nightmare, which is I played against a techless army. Okay.
Sure.
Who's like certainly better at magic than I am with a big dragon, right? And so I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna be open here, but I'm gonna test this stuff out and see what's what. Now this is a slightly unusual Lumineth army in that the player took techless and wanted to try the all stone people army. So you had like 2 cows and a bunch of the stone mallet guys. So the whole army's immune to Rend 2. Which I'm like, well, Stormcast, that's what I've got. So his whole army's immune to all of my Rend, right? Except techless. Now I have some mortal wounds, which I know are going to be now highly valuable, right? I'm like, okay, got to prioritize where my mortal wound shooting goes. That's super important now all of a sudden, because I cannot rely on any of my normal damage, because I'll roll in there, he'll pop a penny or an AOD or something, and suddenly he's on just like a 3-up save, effectively unrendable, right? And so I drew out his auto say no, Techless's auto unbind with the Atavistic Tempest. Which I was trying to, like, he had a unit that he knew he needed to keep in line because it was like Techless's personal chaff, right? And so I threw the Atavistic Tempest at them knowing he would auto dispel that. So then I moved Krondus into position in between his 2 casts and then unleashed a Purple Sun. And that's when I learned... Of course. Yeah, I cast over the top of Techless on the second one. But that's when I also learned just how good my opponent was at rolling 4-ups, because obviously every time this endless spell rolls out, it's gonna give this 4-up chance to like to do nothing and then ping me back mortal wounds. What happened there was I got basically no negatives to save on any units and took 7 mortal wounds, so that was a great time. And I was like, all right, well, this isn't working. So I had to change tactics. And what I realized was I had enough 3-inch reach to go over the top of his bodyguard unit, because he had put Techless right up against the back of this unit, right? Now I couldn't get at the unit. Like, I couldn't get directly at Techless. And so I brought everything in to that front unit, went with the dragons over the top into Techless, got him down to 2 wounds left. And I was like, no, that's it. But I also had Fulminators in there. The rest of the dragon boys all attacked into the little stone guard. And then they threw someone up into the Tempest. He pulled 1 guy. I only got one of these little dopes dead. Okay? But it opened up enough space for my Fulminator to then pile in 3 inches into Techless and finish him. Right? And so, like, I knew the path to victory for me was through Techless's corpse. Right? Like, I couldn't out-magic him. I tried that. It didn't work. And I was like, all right, the plan has to be he dies. And I've got to risk it for the biscuit here. Because if I let this dude go ham... And by the way, the spell I had shut off with my Dispel was his Protection of Techless. Because I knew that was what was going to keep him alive, having the 5-up ward. He could put me under Total Eclipse. He could do everything else he wanted. I didn't care. But if he had a 5-up ward, it threw off all the damage calculations. Right? So find that one spell and find how you're going to win around it. Right? Or how you're going to play around that thing. I think a lot of things, this happens a lot with like Death Stars. People are like, I can't kill that unit, so they just throw everything at it. No. Run. Just
no,
like,
yeah,
run.
Yeah.
that is one thing that I will say that I think a lot of novice players, but even some reasonably seasoned players have a really hard time with, is just acknowledging that there's a target on the board that, you know, even if it is killable, maybe it's going to take so much effort that by the time you finally kill it, the game's going to be over and you're going to have lost.
Yep.
And you're much better off just saying, okay, that thing is just a brick wall. I'm going to completely ignore it. I'm not going to target with a single attack, and I am just going to wipe everything else out that I can.
Yep.
You know, and a lot of people just it's some sort of instinctual thing. They're just like, no, I've got to go kill that big stompy monster, or, you know, this unkillable thing, or this unit that's just rock hard, you know. And it's just like, be okay just retreating. You know,
Right.
just retreat from it. Don't give him an extra round of combat, you know, and just, you know, throw some chaff in his way so that he can't get into your important stuff. That's a lesson that I feel like some people take a long time to learn.
Yep. Absolutely.
100%.
And then the last one's a simple one, which is double check any heuristics and bias you have about how your army works in general versus this game in specific, right? Like, okay, normally you mentioned like your raptors, your long strikes, right? Against the IDK. It's a great example. Like, suddenly this unit that has incredible reach and can kind of pick out the target you need goes up against IDK, and it's like,
Yeah,
very
that's a bad
different
day.
set of functionality, right?
Yep.
So you can't rely on the same heuristics you often have of like, I know I can control and remove their linchpin piece, because you may not have that capability all of a sudden, right? So always be double checking your biases. Okay, cool. All right. Let's keep going. Deployment. Deployment is next. I have lots of points here, and these are all phrased in like questions. Many games are won and lost in deployment. Okay. Here's a fun story. I'll tell you a quick fun story before I get into this. When we did our first VinnyCon and had Scott and John and Sam all come, we played some AoS a whole bunch. And I told Scott, I said, you know, I'll play a game against you. I said, I'll beat you. I don't care. You can take whatever. You can pick any army I have. I'll beat you. And so he picked my Iron Jaws. I was like, okay, that's fine. So I said, go ahead and, like, you know, I'm this many drops, you're this many drops, whatever. Let's do this. We set up. So we set up, and I said, we finished setting up, and I said, okay, you lose. Do you want to re-rack real quick and try to do this again? And he's like, what do you mean? And I was like, your linchpin is this piece. Like, it's obvious. This is what you care about. You have it wide open. I can come right in there with my Mega Boss or my pigs or any unit, and I can lift both of these units without any fear of strike back, because your other units are too far away to get involved in this fight. Right? And I was like, so here's what I would do. And I gave him some thoughts, and then he reset up, and I was like, okay, now let's play. Right? Now, you're not going to do that in a tournament game. But my point is just, like, deployment is a very important thing. And then you have to answer a lot of questions in deployment. What are your screens and chaff? What is your bait? I think bait is the often unanswered question. I love bait. Like, you're going to lose stuff. I love throwing stuff out there that will get my opponent salivating to come make a bad choice. It's like one of my favorite things, right? Put something there that you know they're going to want to come after, that you can afford to lose, and watch them come chase it down and make a bad choice and open some part of their army up for reprisal. Right? There's often some risk there, because if they like roll super explosive on the dice or get something lucky, it could turn against you. But most of the time it won't, and sometimes you got to play the odds.
Do you do that much, Matt? Try to bait much? I don't. That's not really the kind of player I am.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is exactly what Vince was talking about, but it sounds really weird. And But a lot of times I'm actually okay letting my fulminators get charged. So one of my oldest tricks, and it's one that's worked a lot, is I'll just stack armor buffs on the fulminators, and I'll push them into the middle of the board, and everybody in the back of their mind is, fulminators are gross on the charge. They just melt anything on the charge, right? And so, and they have this gnawing thing in the back of their mind. They're like, well, I've got to get into them. I've got to make sure that I'm not going to get charged by them. But, for one, when I have all those buffs on them, you're not likely to do much unless you're like rocking Rend 3 or just doing gobs of mortal wounds. So I'm not really risking much. And honestly, if you do the math and you calculate out how much do fulminators do on a charge versus how much do they do in 2 rounds of combat with 2 shoots, because they get to stand and shoot. So if you do 2 rounds of combat off the charge with 2 shooting attacks, they actually do surprisingly similar amounts of damage. And as long as I'm not losing fulminators, then I just want them in combat, right? And so that's probably one of the ones that I've used a lot. I don't, like I said, I'm not sure if that's exactly what you had in mind.
Exactly what I'm talking about. Yes, it's you put a piece out there that like, sure, because there's some risk to you putting it out there, right? They could roll off the charts. You could roll a few too many ones. Things could go south, right? It can happen. You're taking some calculated risk, but what is actually going to happen is, mathematically, is you're going to get to push a bunch of free damage into them, and now they're out of position where you can counterpunch their hammers without as much risk. Yeah, 100%. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, I think a lot of people try to overprotect their pieces, right? You have to you have to give your opponent something to fight, because that's what makes them move out of position in some way.
As we're talking about this, I'm realizing that I definitely misspoke, because that was the design of the Midwest Bash Stormcast list, was Bastion. Bastion is used in one of 2 ways. He's either a utility piece with the bunker, or he's a distraction bait piece. I want my opponent to go after him if I know that he will be able to survive on average, because Mystic Shield, Warding Lantern, +2, Finest Hour, +3, etc., right? All at defense, potentially +4, with a 4-up ward and his healing. He's incredibly tanky, and it can be difficult for players to not want to deal with him when he's in your backfield. He's on the side. That stretches them out, yada, yada, yada. So, yeah, no, absolutely. I can see the value of it.
Yeah, Bastion's great, right? Because, you can actually completely heal everything they put into him. So he's definitely one of those ones where it's like, if you go, if you're going to go for him, you better kill him, or else you probably lost the game, because you put so much effort into him, and then to come up with nothing, that's a huge swing.
Yep. If you come at the king, you best not miss. By the way, Big Tom, the answer is Tree Revenants. It's just Tree Revenants. It's easily Tree Revenants. What's the threat range of the enemy army? This is like my number one thing I'm always thinking about, because it's going to determine a lot of how I deploy. And by that, I don't just mean what they can shoot, although that's a relevant part of the calculation. What is their magic range? Do they have something like Portal? What's their mobility? Do they have the ability to ambush out? Right? Are they going to try to alpha me? Like, what capability do they have to reach me and threaten things I care about, right? Do they have unorthodox drops? Like if you're playing Skaven, who have multiple units that can show up within 6 inches instead of 9, right? That changes a lot of your math all of a sudden, right? So like, what do they have off board? What can they take off board? All this kind of stuff. And then what is their ability to touch me round 1, right? Because that can set a lot of deployment. You have to play, you have to be tighter, you have to have your pieces more sort of castled, more board control, more blocking out your backside and things like that if you think you're going to be ambushed and stuff like that, right? The flip side of the earlier question, what can't you afford to lose in this game, and how are you going to protect it? If you are in something like Scions, does that go in the heavens because you don't want to lose it, right? Is that the plan? Sure. If you know they've got a turn 1 big alpha capability at range, they can just, 15 bow snakes, pew, 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 put that thing in the heavens or something like that. Like, whatever, right? Don't set up on the line. Know what their threat range is. Move back off the line. Will you have priority or not? That's a knowable thing. How many? I'm 2 drops. How many drops are you? Okay, I will have priority. That is a knowable fact, right? During deployment. So react accordingly, right?
I do have a.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, please.
No, I was going to say I do have a funny story that's sort of relevant to the threat range thing. Please be honest with your opponents when they ask for your threat range. Give them the actual threat range. Okay,
right.
Probably one of the worst games I ever played. This was actually, I was playing War Machine before Age of Sigmar actually became a game. And I played. I was learning. This was like my 4th game or something. Which again, like treat the newbies a little bit better. But anyway, I asked him, like, I'm like, so what's the threat range of this piece? And he just told me basically it's base movement. When I asked for the threat range, and so I set up all my pieces, and then it goes to his turn, and he's like, okay, well, this ability gives him +2 to move, and this ability gives him another +3 to move, and now he's making that threat charge, and of course he blows everything up, and I'm like, why did we even play this game? Like, I asked you what the threat range was. I was clearly making decisions based off of that, and then you pull like an extra 5 inches out of nowhere. And then of course, that's the whole game, right? So
100%. Yeah. Like when people ask me the question, like if I've got a shooting unit or something, or I have a teleport, I'll be like, well, I've got a teleport, so I could do that. That could make me drop at 9, so I can place around, right? This shooting unit can move 5 and then shoot X. So, it's effectively this range, right? Those are the kind of ways that you generally, if you're like not a jerk, should phrase things, right? Yeah. Or like exactly what you said. These guys move 5 base, but I can. A good example again, just to return back to Skaven, it's a really easy one to say, where you're like, my base move is 7. I can get +3 to run and charge, or so that factor that into your thinking, right? Because a 9-inch charge is a really easy charge for me with +3 or something like that, right? Whatever. So then I have this series of questions: when to castle, when to spread, when to be on the line. And that is scenario/matchup dependent a lot, right? It is not always the right answer to tighten into a castle, but sometimes you kind of have to. If you think that like somebody's going to bring their entire Ironjaw's army into you turn 1, then it could be right that you castle up. By the way, it might also be right to completely spread out and give them no density of targets to hit, right? So they have to pull their own forces apart. But like, what's the makeup of their thing? This is one of those things that's really, really hard. And I think you kind of have to learn by example. But, I will generally, I don't set up on the line unless there is some reason to do so. Like some direct reason. Like I think I'm going to go first, and like, or I have reason to go first. So I know, like, I have priority and I know I'm going to want to go first because this particular scenario has a huge, first mover advantage. And so I want to get out an alpha bunker with as much as possible and just move out and T-pose like crazy. Right. So I'm going to buff and walk, and I want as much of my army as possible to get out there. And effectively, I'm going to try to build my castle out in the middle of the board. Right.
Which there are multiple battle plans that are like that in this current season.
Yeah.
The Realmstone Cache and the prize of however you pronounce the word, Galet, Galet, whatever. And I've had 3 games where after each game, my note was, you probably should have gone first. I'm so unaccustomed to going first.
We were playing Realmstone, that Techless against Stormcast game I was talking about. That was against Realmstone because I wanted to see how that would play when I gave away the first turn and just let him move up and squat on it with his castle.
So. Yeah, it's funny because normally I like going second in most matchups, but most of the lists I play, I don't actually have the choice, and so I actually really like to make lists that are flexible and they can go first or second, and I kind of let my opponent sort of pick their poison. But at Adepticon, one of the only games that I actually dropped my opponent was against the Fire Slayer guy. And, generally it's like, yeah, no brainer. Like, I'll let him come up. He can't do anything to me. And then I smash him and I have the chance for the double right away and just sweep him away. But he had nothing but those Volkite Berserkers.
Sure.
That have the 4-up ward and all the
Berserkers.
Yeah, and he had he just had a ton of them. And so I sat there and I'm just like, man, I really don't want to give him first turn and just let him sit right in the middle of the battlefield because I don't have more bodies than him. Like I am not going to outbody him on the points. And if we're going to have this, throw down, slobber knocker, just bloody contest, I want it to be in his deployment zone so that I can sit on the points and rack up some points so that even if that, bloody brawl goes poorly for me, by the time he can actually move off of his deployment zone and start scoring points, hopefully it's too late.
Right.
And so I ended up going first, and I came screaming across, the battlefield and, tried to keep him in his deployment zone as much as I could.
Yep. Absolutely. The next one was how much can you react to your opponent's deployment? Now, one of the advantages, like we all know the advantage of going low drop. It gives you a chance for priority. But I don't think we talk about the advantage to being high drops as much, which is you can react to your opponent's deployment. Some of my favorite Skaven lists, I'm not even putting a model on the board until their army's deployed, even if they're like 4 drops. Right? I'm like 13 drops. My first 5 drops are reserves or null. And so I'm just like, this thing's in reserve, this thing's in reserve, this thing's in reserve, this thing's in reserve. And then I get to watch them set up their whole army and then react accordingly. Okay, now I'm going to put my pieces where they're going to capitalize the most, right? In opposition to you. And I know you've got priority. And so, and that also gives me then some understanding of what's going to, like, generally, it's pretty easy to read. Are they going to want to try to alpha you, or are they going to want to give you the first turn? Right. And that often has to do with, again, answering the earlier question of what's their threat range and what's their alpha potential. Right.
Yeah, Bastion is amazing for the deployment phase. One of the things that, again, I think is somewhat a human psychology sort of thing is, that I'd put those raptors and I'd just kind of line them up and do some ranging, to see which targets I can hit, and I put them kind of there, and I'm just like, oh yeah, they can hit there, okay, yeah, and they're big toy that they really don't want me to just nuke off the board, and then they're just like, okay, well, I'll go first, and then I'm like, oh, okay, well, Bastion's gonna pull these guys back to where they're perfectly safe.
Yep.
And now you can't really do much, and now I get to go second, which is what I wanted to do anyway.
Right.
Love it. Love it. And then my last point on this one is have a plan for your first 2 turns. Deployment is your first movement phase, right? That's how you should think about it. Deployment is your first movement phase. So make decisions accordingly, right? Like, are you putting pieces at risk in a way that you wouldn't do later, right? Are you setting yourself up in some negative way? And what is your general strat for the first 2 turns in the game is like somewhat knowable. You don't need to try to map out all 5 turns. That's not possible. Things are going to go in weird ways in almost every game. But like, okay, in the first 2 turns, be a turn ahead, right? Don't shoot where the target is, shoot where the target's going to be, right? Like you, and we'll talk about this some on the next slide. Okay. Cool. Let's talk about the action. All right. The action. The action is joined, gentlemen. The game is afoot. Hey, remember how we made those cheat sheets and reminders and used AoS reminders or did whatever? Use it. I've seen people bring cheat sheets and they set it down and don't look at it. I'm like, why did you make that? Use the thing. Movement matters a lot. Like a lot. Like a lot. So much. It's the most important thing you do. It's way more important than getting into combat. or anything. Where you move will determine the scope and sweep of the game, because where you move determines where your opponent has to move and vice versa. This is where we mentioned this already earlier, but don't get caught seeing red. Right? Like, it's easy to get caught in a fight and overcommit. Stop. is this fight worth it? Leave if it's not. Retreat. Get out of there. Be ready to, put yourself into where you could rally next turn. All right. Except
you can also, by retreating out, you can also get your opponent into a worse position.
Sure. Because then they have to keep
extending. Retreating off an objective
Yep. Except that some things will just die. Don't throw good money after bad. This is something I see a lot, where like some unit gets charged by a hammer that's obviously going to kill it. Okay, like it's so obvious. It's clear that the unit that is being charged does not have the toughness to withstand the hammer that has hit them. Okay, there's no help coming on the horizon, right? And then it gets to the combat phase, and they're like all out defense. And it's not a battle tactic unit, right? It's not like something they're trying to keep alive for a battle tactic. Stop it. Use that somewhere else. Use that command, unless like it's literally the bottom of the round and you're about to flush all your command points down the toilet. Like, that's a resource. What are you doing? That unit was dead already. It's dead whether or not you have that, right? Like, know the math. If you're getting overkilled by 15 wounds, your all-out defense isn't going to move those numbers back into saving, right? So like, know when it's worth know when to hold them, know when to fold them, as it were, right? And you get there by knowing the math of like how hard a thing hits versus your unit. And even if you don't know the math, you can get there. Even if you can get there through sort of like the gut instinct. If you play enough units, if you play enough armies, if you play enough hammers, you kind of know where it is, right? Yes, we did. We talked about it just a little while ago. Okay, we talked about it in pregame. All right, I'm gonna pause there. Matthew, what do you think about all that and like getting fights? You strike me as somebody who's sort of always thinking about like, is this a fight I want to be in or not?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to be honest with you, I feel like everything that matters has already been done by the time you're in combat.
Love it.
By the time you're in combat, hopefully, all the important decisions have been made. I wrote a note that I was going to talk about target priority, but again, it gets implemented in the action, but honestly, it's stuff that you should be thinking about in the pregame and in the deployment and in the movement. Is it a linchpin? Do they have like a glass cannon that you just have to get off the table? Are they light on something that they really need, like mortal wounds or rend? And that becomes a much higher priority. Or sometimes, I've seen some armies where, they just really stack up on heroes, and they've got no Galatian veterans or no bodies, no troops to actually contest points. And it's like, okay, well, I'm actually going to just target your 2 troop units, pick those up, and now you've got like 5 bodies that you're never going to be able to take any of these points from. Even if you slowly kill my entire army, I know if I pick up this and this, now the victory swings heavily in my favor just from an objective standpoint. But that target priority really should be coming into play before you're in the action. I think one thing that I struggle with, one of the few things that I struggle with when it comes time to actually start rolling attacks, is splitting attacks. You can kind of game yourself a little bit if you know the math, and you're just like, okay, well, I know that I really only need a couple fulminators to just completely destroy this unit, and so I'm going to get greedy. And I'm going to put these other 2 into this other unit, start beating them up. And then, if you just roll, a couple standard deviations below, and now all of a sudden that unit that you really needed dead is not dead, or what have you. So that's something. I always tell myself afterward that I'm never going to split attacks again, because usually when you try to fine tune the damage that granular,
right,
you
remember you're playing a dice game.
Yeah. So,
no, that's fair. I mean, we have the master of splitting attacks in the chat. Rerolling one Jack is out there. The man, the man himself who splits attacks all the time. And what I'll say is, my rule of thumb for splitting attacks is, how much does it matter if this unit I'm fighting dies?
Sure.
Right? If I'm in a fight where I'm just like, okay, I'm cleaning these two things up, but this isn't the real action, cool. Maybe it's the right idea to split both attacks, or to split the attacks, right? Because you're like, well, on dice, I'll kill the one unit and damage the other. And if I don't, no big deal. Neither one's gonna punch back at me hard enough to really matter, right? But if I'm like on a battle tactic to kill this unit, or this unit's holding the objective and I've got to get it down to take it, or whatever, right? If it's like a linchpin moment towards scoring, you don't split. You go all in. Even if you're sure you're going to overkill him, you go all in, right? Like that's the decision point for me, right? The other thing I'll say is don't forget you can split attacks when you have units with wildly different reaches and you're fighting over the top. The example I gave from earlier, where like my little dragon Knox had this 3-inch reach and could go over the top, whereas the little swords couldn't. Fine. I split the attacks, right? Because why not? Like, this is the target I want to hit. I put everything I can into it. What I can't, I'll try to pick up what I can do. Right?
Right. Yeah.
So,
another easy one is if you have like very different profiles in terms of like rend. You want to send all the non-rending attacks into the lower armor saves and the high rending attacks into the bigger armor save.
100%. Yep. So like you have to like assess the nature of, one, how important is this thing I'm fighting? Like hopefully you've followed Sun Tzu and you're fighting on your ground, right? You've picked the fights you want to have. And if that's the case, then just answer the question of how important is this thing and decide accordingly. And moreover, what's the appropriate reaction they're going to have? Okay, next point. Always assume you're going to get double turned if it's a possibility. Like if you're on the bottom of the round, I apologize. If you're not on the bottom of the round, like you went top of the round, right? And so hence they have the bottom. Assume when you're moving in your turn, like you have first turn. So you move out. Okay, they're going to go at the bottom of 2. Assume they're going to pull the double. It's not the statistical likelihood, but assume it, because you're going to play differently when you do so. You'll set up double chaff lines. You'll keep in mind what they get in 2 movement phases, right? And so on and so forth. Now, you have to this is where we get into the next line as well. These two are in order, which is you minimize risk unless you can get the win. And this is the toughest challenge, understanding the balance, right? Because if you think they're going to get the double, you can't just sit there like 2 full movements plus charges away from their entire army all the time, right? You're never going to be on an objective. You're going to just lose the game because you're overly cautious. So it's not avoiding risk. It's minimizing unnecessary risk, right? Like, I have the troops to put 2 chaff screens in the way, right? So I'm going to do that. So even if they get the double, they're not getting to my goods, right? Or I'm going to put this unit I really care about that like I can teleport later. It's going to stay in the back line, right? Because it doesn't need to be doing anything this round. It's not winning me the game by it being out there this round. Cool. Let's keep it in quote unquote reserve, right? Until I need to use it later, right? Where do my heroes need to be to make sure that like, if they plow through what's in front of them, I'm not risking my heroes. If that's an important utility piece or something, right? And that's a really tough line to walk. One more slight point I want to make on this whole thing: don't always take the double. This is like the easiest mistake I see people make all the time. They roll, they get the double, they take it. And the number of times I've been happy about that because suddenly it gave me the bottom of the turn, which I knew was going to be more valuable anyways, right? And they were in such a position because of how I had moved where they are not going to be able to capitalize on it. I'm like, okay, great, cool. And because I know they're just going to they're just shoveling good money after bad.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So sometimes it's not the right answer to take the double turn. You like ask yourself the question, if I give this away, what really happens? And what does that put me in the position to do? Is that a better position for me? Is having the extra command point? Is having to choose the proving ground? Is being in wherever, position to react to what they're going to do? Am I better because of that? Right.
Well, and that kind of plays into what you've already said about if you play the top of turn, 1 or whatever, in a manner that you expect them to get the double, then you're probably putting yourself in likely be in a better position to where if they get the chance, well, now all of a sudden it doesn't look so bad. And so when they take it, you've kind of set yourself up for success, to a certain extent.
Yep. 100%.
I have a ton of thoughts on this one, guys. Oh yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Sorry. One other thing that I think I see a lot, and I think it's something that it's correct, but it's not as correct as often as a lot of people think it is. So one thing I'll see is people will look at the game state and they see that they're down, and they'll just say, well, I need the double to win. And they'll basically just throw the whole game, they'll be super aggressive, and they say, well, if I get the double, then this might work and I might be able to pull the game out. But they do it, and there is a time for that, right? If the game is really that bad to where you've got to have the double to win, then it's good to acknowledge that and say, okay, I'm going to throw, but realize that you're gambling the whole game on a single dice roll, which is not usually good.
Right.
So you're probably in a really bad hole at that point. And I've seen a lot of people make that judgment way too early. Like the game is just getting started. Like one or two things have gone badly for them, or maybe even not that badly, but they're perceiving it as having been really bad. And they're just like, oh, well, I'm already behind the 8 ball and I need the double. So I'm just going to overextend myself and gamble the whole game on this one dice roll. And then they don't get it. And then the game's over. It's like, yes, that is a state of the game that can happen. And, if it is, then acknowledge it and go ahead and gamble. But that should hopefully be very rare. And I've seen a lot of decent players kind of make that gamble way too early.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, so I've got so many thoughts on this one. I feel like this is one of the fundamentals of going from a newer player to an intermediate player to a good player. Like a lot of newer players and intermediate players, they don't get past this. I think this whole double turn thing, right, that we've always had with this game impacts so many things, and that it's one of the defining yes or no in terms of, have you gotten to a point where you know how to address this? In your list building, in your planning, in your deployment, in your moving, etc., etc., in thinking about your battle tactics. It impacts just about everything. Like Vince, we've often talked about how it's not the double from 1 to 2, it's the double from 2 to 3, that you'll often see good players or great players, they'll give up the double from 1 to 2, they'll take the double from 2 to 3 and pedal to the metal and maybe close out the game at that point, or really break somebody's back. Not always the case. There are times, this also impacts what kind of player are you? Like Darren Watson often talks a lot about how he's a very aggressive player. Be aggressive. That's a play style. That's Darren's play style. It's not everybody's play style. There are some armies that will lean into that and they'll want to take that double because they can break somebody's back going from bottom of 1 to 2, like maybe Khorne with Scarbrand, a lot of Bloodthirsters, 6-inch pile-in, activations, fighting twice. Like that could just burn through an army if you're not careful, right? If you get doubled by something like that. But anyway, yeah, to me, like there, you could do an entire show just based on this one bullet point and how much it impacts in terms of winning or losing games. So many players I see, still falling into this trap, even intermediate players with quite a bit of experience, of not just making these basic mistakes that screw them time after time.
Yep.
Anyway,
100%. And this is tough because you have to really overcome your own biases, right? When something tips in your favor, like getting a double, you're like, oh yes, finally my thing, my good moment happened. And it's like, but wait a minute, right? Are you going to actually capitalize on this? Or are you, like, so much of actually, I think the skilling up is restricting back your instincts and engaging that second order thinking, as opposed to just relying on complete your first order thinking of like, go here, kill this, do that, right? Getting caught and seeing red, not paying attention to your movement in detail. All these kinds of things are just first order thinking and not engaging your second order thinking, right?
I don't know. Like, I feel like it could be a good exercise to like deliberately lean into this notion of building lists and playing games where you are focused on preparing for the double and giving away the double, particularly in round 2.
All of the practice games I've done so far for NashCon, anytime I win priority, I give it away, even if it means my opponent has to double.
Right? It's often more interesting what you're learning.
Right. Yeah, it's just like in a practice game, I don't like, you win or lose, who cares? It's a practice game. You're doing it to learn, right? So like I will just give it away because I'm like, okay, how am I going to react to this when this happens in reality when it matters? I can't bank on winning that dice roll. Right? So like, don't just theory it out, play it out when you're doing a practice game. Like, give it away, even if you know it's the wrong choice in a practice game, and then see how, you respond to it, right? Play knowing you're going to do that in the game, and then give it away every time. It's a good way to just like learn. All right, the deets. Let's get into them dirty deets. This is the little stuff, but I think it's important. The order of combat activation matters. That one's probably pretty obvious for most people, right? But like, think about what order you're activating your units in. What do you need to kill? And this goes and connects very closely to the next one, which is pile in can be a huge deal in both how it could bring other units into combat, when it could block units out. Tyler, would you please tell your story about you screwing up the order of activation and how pile in messed you over? Could you tell that story again, please?
Yeah, totally. A few weeks ago, playing a practice game. This was my last game leading up to Midwest Bash with my Stormcast Celestin Prime and Bastion list. And so I had an opportunity to go into combat with Prime, to tag some puppies, some direwolves, and pile into Manfred whenever it came to the combat phase, but to stay outside of Manfred's 3 inches in the charge phase, right?
Sure.
So that
way
you couldn't
blip away from him.
I can't blip away. And so set all that up, move, and then go into combat phase, and I activate with Bastion first. Like an idiot, because then the dogs, they pile around the other way with Celestin Prime, forcing me to go the wrong way in terms of what I intend to do with my pile-in. And yeah, so do that. That's a huge. There are a number of instances like that in terms of piling in that can take a little time to catch those instances. So you kind of gotta catch yourself and look at what could happen here in terms of how they could pile in to mess up the plan. Yada yada yada. There's a number of different situations where stuff like that can come up. But yeah.
Yep.
It can make a big difference.
Yeah, I think honestly, pile in is probably the most, I don't know if technical is the right word, but I think it's the most technical skill that I think differentiates, new to mid to great players. Because you can do a lot of things, like not only just, bringing units in, bringing units out, but even just like a lot of times I'll pile in, into cover, so that when they swing back, now all of a sudden, I've got some extra protection there that they weren't counting on, So there's a lot of little interesting facets that pile in can get into that you'll see a lot of skilled players do some interesting stuff with pile in that you're just like okay.
Pile-in checklist in itself, Matthew. Yeah, all the like little heuristics and potential opportunities, like opportunity list. Try to keep in mind of what could be happening at any given time. Yeah, with pile-ins, and so many players I just see like they don't do anything with their pile-ins. They could be doing so much and they just skip it. They're not thinking about it.
Well, and that's the thing, because let's be honest, 60-70% of the time in a lot of fights, it actually doesn't matter. Right? Yeah. Like most fights are just gonna be like one unit going into another unit. There's kind of nobody else around. Everybody's already fighting. My 2 fulminators are up against your 5 dweebs. I've already got everybody's within combat range. Let's just do this. I'll roll it out. I don't need to. I'm not trying to do anything too wacky. I'm not near an objective. Or I'm already on the objective safely, or whatever. Right? There's a decent percentage of the time it just doesn't matter. Okay, and you can kind of just move fast. The important part is to stop before you make that call and say, does this matter? Right? Can I pile in, pull somebody in that I need to lock up? do I need to pile out, get somebody out of combat by swinging around the unit I'm in, and hence removing that unit from combat? Do I need to move to cover? Can I pile toward an objective and then threaten the objective with more models? Those are the important questions to ask yourself, right?
One that came up literally last night, guys, was I got charged by Rimson and Magmadroth. I had 5 Plague Bearers, and then Orgots was slightly behind, but in the range where I could have activated with Orgots early to hit the Magmadroth. Then Orgots would be in range to be hit by that Magmadroth, in addition to me taking the damage. And whenever I do the Magmadroth on a 4-up, he's doing more wounds back to me. So the thought came to me, not immediately, but after a couple of activations, if I pile in the Plague Bearers, screen off his ability to reach Orgots, he has to activate against the Plague Bearers. He'll definitely math-wise wipe out the Plague Bearers. Then I can hit him with Orgots and save that activation. So anyway, a lot of instances, in terms of what you can do with this.
Yep. All right. My next 2 points are somewhat related, but it's about sort of like, we'll get to it. Unless you're a spell dom, don't bet on magic. And even if you are a spell dom, don't bet on magic. Frankly, just don't bet on magic. What I mean by that is like magic is so finicky. Even with big bonuses to cast, it can let you down. The ranges are often short. Dice are fickle. Like unless you have true rerolls to everything, you can easily roll 2 1s and miscast yourself out of a thing, out of a good magic turn. Then people get a chance to unbind against you. Then they might have some saves against the spell, or a ward, or a spell ignore, or whatever, right? So like, magic should be a part of your plan that isn't the linchpin, unless you're running like a hard spell dom where you think you can get away with it, right? Which if you can, fine, cool, okay, right? But the point is that you need to like think of magic as bonus nachos, not the actual thing. It's the fries that are in the bottom of the bag. You're excited about them. You love a bagler, right? You're excited when you get them bagler fries. They're delicious, but you're not banking on them. You ordered the large fry. That's what you're actually eating. Caleb said magic is life. Well, it's easier when you're playing a spell dom, Caleb, that was what I'm saying, yes.
Oh yeah, especially now that Cogs is ridiculous again.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, how it's like it is again, I do not understand. Cogs,
they basically made the same exact mistake again, didn't they?
Yep. Yes, they
almost
did.
Exact.
Yes.
I thought we learned this lesson already.
Nope. Yeah. Cogs is like the wheel in Game of Thrones. It just turns, and nobody learns anything ever. Nobody breaks the wheel.
No, Cogs is crazy. I'm saddened to hear that you're rocking a purple sun at NashCon.
Let's judge him harshly.
Absolutely.
I'm relying on a
I'm
crutch.
getting in while the getting's good, baby. This thing is broken as all get out, and I was like, look, the flip side of it, to be fair, is I'm running Krondus. Okay, so like that is also simultaneously the worst choice in a purple sun meta, because he can go in the sun pretty easily.
Yeah, he can go right in the mid. Yeah. No, I think my main complaint, honestly, is that I feel like it's not so much that it's overpowered, which it is. It's that I feel like it's going to make for a lot of negative play experiences.
100%, yes. I mean,
and that to me is really the crying shame about it.
Just stupid. It's so stupid.
It is just stupid. If tomorrow they put out an FAQ that said the roll ones to kill things is completely gone and that's it, all it does is the neg one to save, I wouldn't change my list at all. Because I'm using it actively for the neg one to save along with out of it.
Right, and that's how you should use it, right? Because the ones they are kind of unreliable. Mm-hmm. They can be game winning, right? Mm-hmm. And if you ping enough heroes with them, then you'll roll a 1.
Oh, that thing loves eating heroes. Yeah, it's great.
If you can consistently ping 2 or 3 heroes for 2 or 3 turns in a row, you're gonna pick up some of those heroes.
Yep.
But yeah, no, and the -1 Ren thing, that's actually really strong, especially if you build around it. That's more than more than worth its points in the right list. But
yeah, I love me some Stormcast with Neg 4 Rend. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, exactly. My last opponent, Matthew at Midwest Bash, he leaned into this. It was an amazing Stormcast list. He had Krondus with Purple Sun, 4 Tempestors, right?
Yep.
So they're coming in -2 Rend with Purple Sun, potentially -3 Rend with Atavastic Tempest. He's got Adjudicators with Boltstorm Crossbows. He's like, he really built around Atavastic Tempest, Purple Sun for stacking up Rend, and quite potent.
Yeah, no, I think you could, if you lean into a shooting list, Purple Sun becomes gold.
Yeah.
Sure. Which leads us right to the next one, which is remember your heroic actions. The one that always gets forgotten is heroic willpower, which is the non-wizard bonus unbind. I'm like, how many casts do you have? Right? And I'm like, can I catch up by giving myself that bonus unbind, or just like, I need to pop this endless spell off. Like it's got to go, and I don't want to burn one of my casts. Heroic willpower is the thing. That's 100%er. I don't I have to roll to make the thing happen, but like I don't have to roll a 4 up to get the bonus. I do it. I get the extra unbind or dispel or whatever. So
yeah, the unbind is clearly the winner out of those in my book.
It's the sleeper hit that you don't see people use enough, and I just remember it's got to go on a non-wizard. That's the only trick. But you probably have a non-wizard hero in your army unless you're playing, I don't know, Tzeentch or Lumineth, I guess. So and then always remember your monstrous rampages, your roar is so important. And I mean this in both ways. Not just you should remember to roar and think about who you're roaring, right? But also if you charge a monster, assume that one of those units is going to get roared, and you will not have access to command abilities in the combat phase. Just assume the roar, right? And that will change. Maybe you now charge with 2 units instead, or something like that, right? Whatever the case is. So, as you move, keep your screens and placements in mind, as well as enemy threat ranges. And always watch your buff ranges for the next turn when you move. Oh goodness, this is another one that I think really is the beginner player versus the intermediate player type of thing, right? Your hero has some range that he's going to try to do, even if it's just 18 inches for a command ability or something, right? Because he's the general or a totem or whatever. And the number of times I've seen people move out of their range because they're only thinking about where the piece needs to be now, not not when it rolls back to their turn. Your pieces are still going to be in mostly the same place unless they got charged and piled. Oh, by the way, another good way to use pile in, bringing people back into auras and ranges if you're trying to squish just crap, I got an edge out of space. We all do it sometimes. We're all gonna make these mistakes sometimes. Pile in could be a good way to be bloop, okay, back in. We're good. And I'm set up for my next turn to now be in range. Right? So think about your next turn buff ranges when you're moving now. Where do your people need to be?
Yeah, that was one thing that I learned. I learned to appreciate Bastion's board-wide free command point because I'm making a list for NashCon that has the Imperatant, and I'm like, oh yeah, he's kind of like a little baby Bastion, right? Because he's handing out the free command point. But there's a big difference between that 12-inch bubble and board wide, right? There was many situations where I'm like, man, I really want to capitalize on this command point, but he's just not in range. And so then I'm like, man, maybe I need to make him my general so that I get that extra, 6 inches, because that makes it pretty big difference.
I thought he had the totem keyword. He doesn't.
Nope.
Okay.
Castellan does, but not the Imperator. Yeah, no, I'm. It's very tempting, but it also makes the Imperator an incredibly juicy target for my opponent.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. I had a Stormcast versus Stormcast game where we both had Imperatants and Annihilators, and we both immediately recognized the value of our Imperatants. And immediately, both of us had dropped and obliterated. I don't remember what the turn order was, but it didn't matter. In our back-to-back turns, both of our Imperatants got annihilated. It's just
yeah, no, I wanted to... I like to split up the utility on my heroes so that there's none of them that are like clearly the one. But if I want to make him the general, well, now he's got the Arcane Tome. Now he's got the Master of Magic. Now he's got the free CP. He's my general, so he's also my source of that CP. He's also, and then of course the deep striking at 7 inches. So it's like that's a lot of utility on a single hero.
It's like World of Warcraft. It just ends up having that giant hunter's mark arrow bouncing up and down on top of him, like shoot this thing.
So I have to make that decision. I have to make that very difficult decision.
The last ones I have is enemy reaction should figure into your plans. I already talked about this with Roar, but like assume somebody's going to redeploy away from you, right? Assume somebody will unleash on you. How does that change the way you charge, the place you charge, the area you move, right? All these kinds of things. Maybe you don't move within 9 because you don't need that. Like that unit doesn't need to die this turn. It's not my top priority. Let's not give them a chance to redeploy and do something wacky, right? Like I'll just set it at 9.
I think, so, I mean, I think something that is somewhat counterintuitive is that in a lot of situations, staying just outside 9 might actually be a more probable charge than you going into like 7 and then having them redeploy, and so you're better off just sitting right outside 9 and then, maybe throw a reroll at it. So that you've got, a decent chance at it at least versus, risking that redeploy. And now if they roll hot, now you can't even make that charge anymore.
100%. Yeah. I will also say this is another place where bait can matter. Like you can try to bait them. I love pulling these. I talked about how in my cities list last year at NashCon, I used the Knight Venator to pull all out defense in the shooting phase. Like I had a mostly shooting cities list and I would always start with the Knight Venator targeting something I didn't really need to kill. And I would like Starbuster arrow that thing immediately. And I'm like, blah, 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 it does all this crazy damage and it's neg 1 rend. The immediate response from the opponent is all out defense. And I'm like, great, cool. That wasn't my prime target. Now we've gotten that crap out of the way. Now I can just weapons free on the rest of your army and I don't have to worry about you using that command thing anymore, right? So like, again, you can bait out the redeploy by like, moving this other unit you really don't care about. It's going to just get within 9 and then they redeploy away from you. You're like, okay, cool. Now I can just move freely with the rest of my army. Awesome. Right. And then finally, game aids, proper tools, and measuring sticks. Speaking of 9 inches, 6, a 3-inch stick, a 6-inch stick, a 9-inch stick, and a 12-inch stick. These are my go-tos. Now, if you want real bonus points, make yourself an 11 and a 15 too. That way you can mark your little deployment squares. But I rock up and I set them down in order. I'm like, bloop, 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 bloop. There's my little sticks. I'm ready to go. I got special ones for all of them, like little things that like my little favorite 3-inch, my little favorite 6 inches that I bring with me. I have like the metal Adeptus Mechanicus one they made for 40K. That's like all gear. It looks all like a gear and cog for my 6-inch. It's awesome. Anyways, maybe you're like Sean and Jake, and you got your like whole necklace of the original metal 3-inch deployments that you rock up with and set them down like your pirate's treasure, But just have some game aids. By the way, if you don't like want to actual pay real money for these things, you can just go and buy straight like wooden 12-inch rulers, like the ones without the metal bar in them, from a dollar store. Just a little metal or plastic ruler, and then just cut it into segments. Just like if you chop the 3-inch off of, like if you cut 3 inches off a 12-inch stick, you get a 9 and a 3. Yay! So there you go. So yeah, you use game aids, mark them out, understand where things go. It's helpful.
Got an excessive and obsessive with tokens. Just tired of forgetting. In terms of Remember Hammer, so I mark everything nowadays. Hobby Lobby, I buy these little wooden chips, slightly over an inch, slightly over an inch. They're fantastic. Write everything, all the abilities, expert conquerors, helps my opponent. Like here, this is bounty hunters, this is expert conquerors. Everything's marked. So yeah, please everybody, you can use tokens.
I will use this to remind everybody of my solution for buffs, which is you go on to Amazon or to your local sort of big box store or whatever. They sell kitchen refrigerator magnets. They're like an inch by an inch and a half or whatever, like an inch and a half by an inch. And they're dry erase. And I have a little stack of them with a dry erase marker, and I write the buff on there. And I can write any buff or debuff on there, and then I just set that right next to the unit. Super easy. And then then I don't have to worry about marking any special tokens or anything like that. Whatever happens, whatever I need to remember that the unit has going on, I can write it in my little dry erase and slide it up next to the unit. Very cheap, very easy. There you go. Kill all of that stuff out of your memory, because you don't want to be wasting cycles thinking about that stuff. You want to be using your cycles thinking about what is my opponent going to do? What do I need to do? You want to be in the actual tactics, not in the minutia of like, ah, crap, hold on. Right.
Yeah. One thing that I guess sort of kind of goes in with the gaming aids and that sort of stuff that I've started doing, which I'm actually a little bit worried that this might be a little bit of a douchebag move. I don't know.
Okay.
It's so critical, and I do it, so I reciprocate, so I feel like I'm being fair. But what I'll do is I'll actually use the little cardboard tokens, and on the side of the table, I'll actually put my opponent's command points and my command points.
Sure.
There, very visibly, so that we both know exactly how many we have at any given time.
Yep.
Just because there's been a lot of situations where like I can see my opponent is trying to keep track in some way, but it's not entirely clear to me. And sometimes they'll forget, or they'll forget to remove it. And it's like, I really need to know if you're down to 0, because if you're down to 0, then my decision making changes drastically, right?
Yep.
I think it's really good practice. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I said, I do it for both of us so that my opponent knows as well, but it's very transparent. But it is somewhat presumptuous, I guess, to like explicitly keep track of my opponent's command points as well.
No, I think it's totally fair. I'll often mark it with, so I like at some tournament I won a raffle, and it was like the last thing on the table was, remember that pack of navy blue command point dice or whatever that they sold originally that had the various like weird markers, icons for the commands, which didn't make any sense. I keep those, and I just set those over to the side with my command points and their command points, right? And then you just mark them down accordingly. Just keep them out in a public area, like right there, or if there's a big piece of terrain, put them right on top of the terrain in the middle of the thing or something, just so it's easily visible. I don't think that's douchey at all. I think that's actually, no, not at all. I think that's super.
Yeah, that's healthy.
Yeah, like I said, I'm doing it as well. I'm doing it for you as well.
Right.
But it's just, there's so many times where it's like that last command point becomes incredibly valuable. It's like, okay, well, now what are you going to do? Are you going to use it for that redeploy? Are you going to use it for that all-out defense? Are you going to save it for that battle shock? Because all of those are very important. And if you're down to your last command point, then how you use that is very, very important for me to know.
Agreed.
A friend of mine he has these 2 big dice cubes, and he got one out for each of us and set them on the side of the table. Like, I love this. Like, very visible, what are command points? But no, I wish that were more common. I feel like maybe 1 out of 4 games at events, we'll do it that way. But yeah, I'd love to do that every game. It would help out a lot.
Yep. Like, there's no reason that isn't completely open, transparent information. And if you both have a tracker on it, it just makes it easier. Right? It's just,
I mean, I was just worried. I was just worried because, if they have some little token or something on their side of the board that they're using, then I don't want it to come across me like, well, I don't trust you.
I don't trust you, right?
Right.
So I'm going to do it here. I'm going to keep track too, but it's just like, there's a lot of things to remember, and it's just, it's information that I desperately want to be accurate.
I think about Matt, like why we did a shared score sheet, or we recommended a shared score sheet, and we're gonna implement it for next year's Vault Wars, right? Where we're tracking the battle tactics on the same sheet together, so that if there's any discrepancies, we can go back and we have a common sheet that we both signed on upon, we both used, etc. We're not tracking our battle tactics individually. I just think of it in the same categories, that like shared information that's critical. We be accurate, and it's easy to forget, like, oh, actually, I only had 1 CP. I don't have 2. I screwed up somewhere.
Yep.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. No. And yeah. I mean, obviously, I assume it goes without saying that having an accurate picture of where the points, the victory points, are sitting at all times is very good information because, I think decisions, you can make very different decisions if you know that you're up by even just 1 point. If you know that you're up, now all of a sudden you can afford to play in a much more conservative way, and they're on the aggressive foot, or vice versa. If you're behind, you've got to make up ground, and so maybe you have to play a little bit differently than you would otherwise.
Yep. All right. So the game is over. It's the post game. You're done, right? You can just stop. You go home. Celebrate or cry over it. It's the post game. You're finished. Nothing else to think about, right? No, of course not. Of course not. Now is when the real magic happens. The post game. And this actually stretches back into the game, but not everybody has the time to do this during the game. Take notes. If you can do quick notes during the game, great. If you can't, then after the game, write down your thoughts kind of first thing. But make some quick notes. Carry a little notebook with you. And make notes on what happened in the game, what you did wrong. Talk through with your opponent if you got the time. If you're at a tournament or something and you guys finish an hour early, you got all the time in the world, have a quick convo. Hey, what did you see that were opportunities that I missed? What do you think I did wrong? Or, what did I do that surprised you? What did that kind of thing, right? Just have a conversation about the game. This is something, rerolling ones, after they do their battle reports, they do realm talk, where they just kind of break down the game and talk about it and the decisions they made and where they think they went wrong. That kind of thing is so super valuable, right? Because it's how you can sort of crystallize the learnings you had during the game. Don't rely on just the bias. If you could take notes in real time, you'll see that it's not usually your dice that kill you, it's your decisions that kill you. That's not always a luxury you have. Sometimes you're up against it on time. Sometimes you're playing a very time intensive army. So I want to be realistic about this. So even if just after the game you sit down and take 5 minutes of quick notes, it's still going to be more accurate than your offhand memory of it 3 days from now or a week from now or the next tournament from now. Right? Have a support group. Talk through your challenges with others, right? This is true all the way back to list building and beyond, right? Have a group of people who also are players who you can say hey, I ran up against this list. I can't figure out how to beat it. What would you do? Right? It can just be super helpful. And then finally, think about what changes in your list you might want to make or not. Was, one of the problems that happened a fundamental challenge of your army, something that needs to be rewritten? Or was it just, bad luck, this particular matchup, you got to play differently, that kind of thing, right? The inspect and adapt phase is what this is, right? All right. Matthew, what do you think about my post-game process here?
Yeah, no, I think this is hopefully, it can be useful in a tournament, I suppose, but for me, I think it's much more useful, as you're prepping, with your mates. You play a game, you try a list, you get some immediate feedback. I've never been a note taker. I can see how that would be useful, but once I'm kind of in the game, I'm kind of in the zone and I'm kind of locked in. And so I find that to be really distracting. But yeah, no, I think getting that other viewpoint, as to what units worked, what units didn't work, what tactics worked and didn't work. And then how that hopefully either can translate into different lists, different choices, or maybe just different tactics, using the tools that you do have in that list in slightly subtly different ways, maybe. But yeah, I think it's always good to get the other, at least from my perspective, I actually don't get nearly as many games as I'd like to in with other people. So when I do, I really like to get that feedback, so I don't feel like I'm just kind of in my own head constantly talking to myself and being like, oh yeah, this will work. And I'm convinced myself of something, and then I run into a brick wall and I'm just like, oh yeah, no, that was an obvious, counter to that this isn't going to work. I got to go back to the drawing board.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people in the assistant ref and AoS coach that, don't immediately change your list. And I agree with that. Sometimes you do need to immediately change your list, but that's part of the thing. You have to, if you think through it in a logical way and talk to other people and talk to your opponent, you'll quickly come to see whether or not it was a fundamental problem with the list, or whether it was like, no, this was a misplay, I could do this better, I was out of position here, I made the wrong choice here, the list is valid, I need to keep practicing with this before I make any changes, right? So like go through all those steps before you decide to make a list change. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Some people I know, they take photos of their games. Carl Stokes, one of our players from St. Louis, Carl does this. He keeps track of all of his games. He takes photos of essentially each turn, and he's got a long catalog of games over the years on his website. So yeah, it's just kind of like an extended memory that he has, where he can go back and see what he did, what happened turn by turn, which I think is pretty cool. I've never done that personally, but yeah, I'm a fan of it.
That's impressive. That's very impressive. I would not do that, because then my camera roll, because I don't folder my photos properly, my camera roll would just be tons of photos of games, and I'd be like, wait, what is this? Okay. Cool. And that's it. We're done. What didn't we talk about, gentlemen? Is there anything I didn't cover? Matthew, I'll start with you. Is there anything we didn't cover that you think was sort of critical for building your skill up?
I don't know about critical for building your skill up, but there was a couple of topics that I did want to touch on a little bit more.
Yeah, hit it.
One of them is just kind of a re-emphasis on a point that we've kind of already made, which goes back to my kind of like, what are your tricks conversation. And that is that, like, at least for me, and I think for most people, the worst thing I can win by is by a gotcha, is by something that they didn't see. And I think, I want to win because I made, good tactical decisions and that sort of stuff. And, obviously the dice come into it as well. But the last thing I want to do is get somebody like that. And I don't want to get got either. It's the worst feeling in the world to lose because, you didn't know some silly rule interaction or something. And so that's one reason, that's another reason I really like that initial conversation is like, what are your shenanigans? Let's be honest. We both know that both of our, each of our lists does some silly broken thing that we're going to lean on. So let's just be honest with it and share that up front. So anyway, so that's just kind of a reemphasis. The other topic that we didn't really talk about at all, that I hate that it's a thing and it doesn't come up very often, which is the sometimes you have to recognize that you're playing against the clock. And you have to recognize that quickly, and usually you can recognize that from their list. Usually it's just a ton of really tanky, hard to move bodies, usually is the form it takes. And you have to recognize, like, we're not getting to turn 5 and we are probably not getting to turn 4. I think this was a good example of this was a game I played against Tom actually at NashCon a few years ago. He was playing some Alpha Block Chaos Warrior list.
Oh yeah. Sure. Yep. This horrible game that I literally left in the middle of and went and got a sandwich.
Wow. All three of us played him that year. I didn't know that all three of us played him.
So as soon as I saw the list, I'm just like, I'm going to make decisions assuming we are not getting past turn 3.
Right.
And that kind of sucks. It'd be nice if we could all of our games could get to turn 5. But you might very well make, in fact, I definitely made different decisions than I would have if I knew I had 5 full turns. There could be matchups where it's like, if I had 5 full turns to just sit here and beat you into the dirt, then I know I could table you and I could get the points and it'd be all good. But if you're playing this really tanky tar pit alpha block type list and we're only playing to 3 turns, then maybe I can't afford to let you go first and bunker up right in the middle of the battlefield, because I probably can't move you in 3 turns, even if I could move you in 5 turns. And so now maybe I have to take the first turn and preempt that when I otherwise might be okay, not, letting you do that because, so anyway, but that's one thing that I kind of hate those lists. No offense, Tom.
Oh no, that list was awful, and he's a bad human being for playing it. Yeah, no, it's fine. We've railed against it on this show many a time.
So while we're on that subject, Matthew, obviously we've talked a fair amount about pace of play on this show. In particular, one of us has had an issue in the past. Me with time in games. I'm getting better. Yes, you're pointing at Matt actually.
on to the viewers, I'm pointing at you.
Excellent. So I've gotten better, but I tend to think we as a community are suffering from a mass delusion about how much of an issue this is still in the game. It's not remotely just me. Just got back from a tournament, right, where I swear 80% of those games didn't see round 4. And it was 2 hours 45 that we were playing.
Sure.
Every event that I've been to, Adepticon included. I mean, I'm going around, so I'm trying to gather data on this as a community. I mean, it's anecdotal. I'm not doing this scientifically. I'm not actually doing survey data. It's totally anecdotal. But I feel like overwhelmingly, I'm hearing that this is a big issue still in the community. And I love that NashCon's doing 3 hours. I think 3 hours should be what we're doing with AoS right now, which is not great. But anyway, it's a long topic. It'd be great to do a show about how to get faster at playing the game. Like someone who has struggled with this, I get tired of the throwaway nonsense that people give out, like just get good, play faster, blah, blah, blah. This is a rampant problem, in my opinion, in the community, among many good players as well. I've played a lot of good players who are as slow or slower than I am. And
yeah, it's tough because certain lists certainly even make it tougher, like the kind of, it's and Matthew certainly talked about one of them, but like there's other lists that will play into that. Huge numbers of bodies, fiddly pile-in tricks required,
totally.
Right?
Yeah,
lots of stuff like that will just get you in lists with like lots and lots of rerolls for some reason because they're still running on an old book. There's lots of little things that that can make it so you end up in a position where it's just unfeasible to complete it in that amount of time. Right.
Yeah, and what I'm trying to convey, Vince, is that, like, dude, I kind of play at a frenetic pace anymore. I still have games that don't, like, get out of round 4. Like, I'm playing pretty... I feel like I'd be honest, because I feel like I've been pretty honest about my problems with this, right? The challenges with this. And I'm playing a 34-wound model army in Stormcast. But, like...
You mean a 34 model, not 34 wounds.
34 model army. I'm getting excited talking about this because, I am very passionate about it because I do think it is a rampant issue in the community that a lot of us are not honest about how big of a problem it can be. And
I think, I think it's a combination of things. I think it is very army dependent and matchup dependent. I think player skill definitely matters a little bit. But I know a lot of people that are probably inclined to not say that this is a problem, probably play armies that, the game's over by the bottom of 2. Just because they're just super aggressive. They're super
the
fast.
Iron Jaws players out there are like, whatever, I don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like there are lists and matchups where it's not a problem. And then there's some matchups where it's a really big problem. I would say I'm kind of a middle of the road. I tend to overthink every once in a while. But I think there's definitely been a lot of games where like I register that we're having an issue, and then it's not gonna a lot of times what I run into is an issue where I'm fairly confident that if we play to 5 rounds, then I've got it locked up. But if we play to 4 rounds, then maybe not, or 3 rounds, maybe not. And so I'm in this really weird situation where like I start picking up my pace, but then I also have to very politely try and nudge the opponent as well. Right. And it's not that a lot of people intentionally play slow. They're playing at the speed that they're playing at, and or at least hopefully. They haven't realized that, slow playing is to their advantage, and then they're doing it deliberately. But it's definitely a tough situation where you kind of recognize that, okay, I really need to pick up the space, and it takes 2 to tango. so how do you, kind of help
and
them?
One thing I want to say here, Tyler, is one, I don't want to totally crack this nut open because this is a Pandora's box of discussion around chess clocks and other things around speed, which is tangential to the current show. Right. Yeah. But on the topic of the current show, I will say this. Doing things like creating yourself a checklist, doing things like knowing your army well and your path to victory, and and getting in those practice games, and understanding how you're going to react in certain situations, all of that stuff will help you navigate that. Right. Whether that be play faster or react exactly as what Matthew said, right, to when you do end up in a situation where you're not going to time. Right.
But and also what I'm trying to convey, Vince, is that, like, again, I know what real slow players look like, right? I've played a bunch of them. I think maybe sometimes, like, I'm maybe deliberately trying to take a lot of bullets to myself out there publicly to force myself to get faster and faster. And I also know that it seems there's a real lack, I think, of understanding in the community about ways that we can speed up our pace of play. Like, what are beyond some of these basic things that we talk about, right? Because I think there are a lot of ways that we can improve pace of play, but there's a deep lack of understanding or awareness about those ways to do it. And but it's an entire show.
It is an entire show on its own. We'll flag it for a future one. But go ahead, Matt.
So I'll just say one little quick thing that I noticed when rolling lots of dice that I've started to do, especially with, when I've got like Vanquishers doing like 60 attacks or something like that on a chart, is I have a little dice tray and I'll just count it all out, and then I'll roll my attacks, I'll roll my wounds, and then I actually just pass that tray to the opponent, so they don't actually have to count everything out.
They can pick up your dice and use it for saves.
They can. So it's the right amount, and we can immediately just go into it, and some people don't have the little dice. Some people only have the middle-sized dice, and then it becomes really obnoxious.
Roll bad, they roll bad, man. You're not supposed to use little dice.
Well, when you're rolling like 60 of them, then we get into this really obnoxious game where it's like, okay, my hands can only physically count like 10, so now I've got to roll like 4 batches, and But anyway.
Yep. I think a speed discussion will be a fun future show that we'll call "Is AoS Too Slow?" or something like that. We'll say that'll be our clickbaity title. All right, but I think we've gotten through this one. I hope we gave everybody a lot of fun tips and thoughts and ways to skill up and improve. And Matthew, thank you so much, bud. It was great to have you on the show. Glad we finally got around to it. Frankly, we've been remiss in not having you sooner.
Yes.
I appreciate it. Thanks you.
Absolutely. And we will, I'll see you in a couple weeks, so that'll be a good time. Very much looking forward to NashCon this year. Hope if you're going to be showing up at NashCon, hope to see you there. If you're going to be at Gen Con this weekend and you see me, say hi. Going to be there this weekend. So a lot of busy month in order here. But what I want to say is thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe. Hitting buttons is fun, and it's good for the whole family. And if you want to support the channel, you can. There is a Patreon link down at the bottom focused on hobby review and feedback and taking your next step in your hobby journey. If you're looking to skill up your hobby to match your play, hey, maybe that's a place you can look. There's also a merch store down there where you can pick up all your cool Team Tom and Team Tyler merchandise. So you can vote for who the winner is amongst the two of them. I think we'll run that. I think at the end of the year, I'm going to total it all up, Tyler, and see who everybody's favorite is. I think that's what we're going to go to. And I'll put up some new merch after that. We got to get some new stuff. But anyways, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. As always, we'll see you next Wednesday.